In a world where competition is increasing, legacy systems in business are simply not enough to survive and thrive. Businesses that have managed to embrace digitization and automation are reaping the rewards, like increased profits and access to wider markets. But there are challenges like the high cost of scaling, lack of knowledge to scale, dearth of a skilled workforce, and many others. Hi, I'm Aloni Bhatt. Welcome to Economic Times India Inc. Boardroom, a virtual gathering and exchange of ideas between India's top corporate decision makers. On the agenda today, digital transformation and automation. Join us for deep insights from key industry leaders who are spelling out strategies that will drive growth. Today, CEOs, CTOs, CIOs, product heads, and CHROs of some of the companies that are driving the country's digital economy will join us. Among the sessions is a roundtable discussion on revenue stream innovation with digital transformation. Another session will look at developing cybersecurity expertise of corporate boards. And finally, a discussion that will give you some ideas on how to manage workforce transformation after the pandemic. A shout out to our partners, Commercify, our associate partner, and global management consulting firm, Bain & Company, our knowledge partner in this journey.
Welcome, everyone. Great to have this audience together to ET India's boardroom panel on revenue stream innovation with digital transformation. I'm joined here today by Rohit Tuteja, who's a director at product at Upgrad, Rahul Kara, who's director global sales for new verticals at Honeywell, Dr. Aladdin Dey, who is executive consulting director and the former CTO of Samsung India. My name is Florian. I lead Bain Company's digital practice in Asia Pacific, and excited to host this discussion with you. Thanks so much for joining us today, Rohit and Rahul. Excited to have this dialogue with you about the topic of revenue kind of innovations through as part of digital transformation. I think what we thought would be useful for the discussion would be maybe we start out with each of you sharing your perspectives on what you've seen at Rockwell and Upgrad particular that worked for you there. They can take the discussion from there. I'm sure there's a series of questions we can dive in as we go through this together. Rahul, can I ask you to start? I think you've got quite a broad view also from your client portfolio.
Sure, Florian, and thank you for inviting me and for this conversation. And the topic itself, as you said, is pretty interesting, and we're talking about revenue streams that can potentially come out of digitalization. And I think so. I talk here from a perspective of actually a technology provider and at Honeywell. We are actually partnering with a lot of customers in the industrial space for digital transformation and working on their digitalization roadmaps. So one of the key things that, of course, the fundamental reason or the level at which most customers today would be is to drive productivity and efficiency within their organizations. And some of the other use cases go broader. They go into safety, particularly in the industrial context. It's a very important piece. Right, and essentially everything that gets done is to drive faster decision making. Now, how some of the customers are innovatively extending that to drive innovation and potentially starting new revenue streams is, in my view, at least from what I have seen across the globe, is twofold. One of the things that we see as a trend is that through this, people are able to come up with newer products, and because of the amount of information, amount of AI and ML ability that's available, the customers are able to come up with newer products in their existing set of portfolio. And some of them have actually gone a notch higher and are also able to create or sometimes co-create IP with some of the technology providers. which then gets taken to the market. The go-to-market could be by themselves, through the technology provider, or jointly. And that's something we also see up in the market now, where joint IP gets created, particularly on this in the space of, say, process technology, or some of the applications that could be built in, having intelligence coming in from their vast experience and years of data that they may have. So those are two essential ways in which we are seeing innovation that the customers are able to do. The second one in particular is pretty exciting, because some of these companies who are say real economy manufacturing companies are getting into co-creating IP and taking it to market, which is essentially in a software or digital space, right? So it's a new space for them. So yeah, I think those are a couple of things that I wanted to quickly highlight. Back to you, Florian.
Great. No, I think very interesting, and also kind of great to see that mix of, as you were already highlighting, improving what's there versus actually opening up completely new opportunities for many companies, which is particularly exciting. We've been joined by Dr. Aleknath from Samsung as well. Thanks so much for making it. It's maybe kind of continued around the room, and Rohit, keen to hear your views as well, what you've seen over the last 2 years in particular, what you see, and then we can go to Aleknath as well. Rohit,
okay, so absolutely. So, sorry about being a little late on another occupations. This is an interesting topic, and I think the revenue streams, how we are creating. Obviously, for Samsung, let me go in this round as devices. We make the digital appliances, home appliances. So for us, that is the core part of it. It is a product. But as we can see, there are two different directions. Things are changing. One, the product itself, the people at the end have to get a consumer experience. So it's not just the product. So certain elements of the experience that we add, and obviously you can even monetize that. And the other part of it is, as we are connecting these devices, we can create for ourselves and for others the new revenue streams on this AI-infused IoT, which have been handling. So how do you make this connected world and benefit out of these? So these are two main directions. And if I can take one more thread, is that in the device itself, one natural way is preload, right? Lots of applications people need to have in smartphone, and now going into smart TV. So that itself, the real estate in this is very precious. And therefore you can demand a premium for that, and where it appears, how often does it appear, which are the models that you could have it. And so obviously the preload exercise. Then in the apps itself, most of the app players are either freemium model if they are doing. So obviously a certain level of it you can do on the free mode, but then there is a premium part of it and it will be monetized. And so obviously it can be revenue shared in that structure. You have the ad spaces, even -1 page we call, or certain other names, that those are the real estate again. And you can deeply engage with others in advertisements, in kind of informative news, and still able to monetize. So these are certain models. And then going into customer services and experience, I'm sure, there are things like, for example, in our Galaxy, we have a Galaxy Care program. So yes, we give guarantee for a certain period, but if you would love to take it for next 3 years, 5 years, all kinds of coverage, then that itself also brings in some way the monetization part. So I'll pause here and maybe go with the flow in the next round.
Great. Rohit, keen to hear your experience as well and hear what you've seen. Maybe we kind of dive into a few topics after that specifically.
Sure, absolutely. In terms of the word innovation itself, it's I always get perplexed by this word with the reality of the word and the perception of the word. When you talk about innovation, the perception which comes in, which is something which is a breakthrough, something unique which the world hasn't seen, and so on and so forth. How I look at innovation is in two ways. One, in form of efficiency, that how do you bring in and make your processes better, which can actually enhance your revenue stream through innovation. And the other is actual getting into newer revenue streams, either by innovation or just by simply finding out the problem, which is either not organized and broken out in the market in digital, in non-digital space, or really getting to a newer technology we can solve, which can solve the real life problem. Now for us, at Upgrad, as we look at it, and while the perception outside could be that all the online players who come in are absolutely system or automation driven, that's not entirely true. A lot of that, I usually look at the model of, I like to put the acronym of MSA, which is manual systems and automation. All the happy flows or something which is more user facing and which drives you towards automation is usually started as in a completely automated way. But there are a lot of systems and manual activities which happen in the back end, which is not visible to a lot of folks. And I think what we are doing at Upgrad is making those systems and manual activities automated to make sure that the model becomes scalable, and the revenue stream, if you are today, if we are servicing one country, how can we go to servicing 40 countries without making any more people hiring or increase in the processes, but just using digital power to expand and scale. The other side is when we started off at Upgrad from a offering perspective, online education was new, and we were offering it for working professionals who wanted to upskill themselves. And now we have innovation coming in form of people wanting to do their undergraduate and postgraduate online as well. So that's another revenue stream which has opened up, and the innovation of really be able to deliver the absolutely similar or a better experience than the students will get in an offline world online is a huge huge innovation on the side of online learning, which is really helping us a lot.
Yeah, great. Now it sounds like all three of you had a fair share of battle scars, I think, in accelerating revenue over the last 2 years, but also before that through digital technology. I'd love to kind of separate the discussion a little bit into two parts from here. I mentioned this to you before, but one more on the existing revenue streams. And I think, Rohit, you were also alluding to this just now, where it's really more on selling more efficiently, selling more, potentially pricing better, and one more on the new adjacent revenue streams. And I think Rahul gave some nice examples there on industrial clients who starting to actually sell software, SaaS type solutions, or other than that, you were talking about kind of different kind of solutions that Samsung is selling now beyond just the core device, which I think is quite exciting as well. So maybe starting on the existing revenue streams. I mean, keen to hear experiences actually, what worked and what didn't. I mean, broadly, I think the landscape is pretty clear. You've got marketing channels where probably shifting the landscape much more to digital and much more ROI-driven marketing. You've got kind of go-to-market channels, so both platforms, but also your own direct-to-consumer, probably with kind of mixed with more legacy channels. You've got the ability to price differently with digital, potentially some more discriminatory pricing based on actual customer need, but also new segments they can access with lower pricing overall. Customer segments. Keen to hear your views. What has actually worked? Like what has clicked in the market versus what was more noise in the ocean, I want to say.
For the last 2 years, I think it's been a bull run, as you see in the stock markets as well, for all the companies. With pandemic coming in, those who had the digital shops, everyone benefited. I look at it from the perspective that, when everyone is benefiting, do you remain happy with what you've got because everyone is in green today? Or you look at from a perspective of, oh God, I could have gotten more. Because what are you benchmarking against? Now, if you have improved by 2x and the market has gone up by 5x, that means you could be happy that we have improved by 100%, but there is a 300% which you have left on the table because you possibly didn't have a strategy and you had an ostrich approach looking internally. And therefore, over the last couple of years, I think everyone has benefited. So have we. While we have had our gains in terms of the number of just the market acceptability of online learning going up, and we had scaled up our potential learners coming in, I think many of the firms were caught unawares as well, as we didn't necessarily have the retention strategy for the top of the funnel. If earlier we were able to convert a certain percentage, during COVID, the funnel increased, but not necessarily the conversion remained intact. The conversion may have gone down. So at net, you had a positive increase and a solid one to show, but there could have been more. And I think that's what we are working on right now. While we did a few initiatives over the 2 years, it was a long period, and we have seen benefits of that with an improved conversion. And we are working on it more and more on the strategy to funnel the top of the funnel in a way that the conversion remains intact or improves to have a better bottom line at the end of the day.
Yeah, interesting. So really more kind of also the conversion retention game, kind of like marketing the funnel was fed for everybody, with conversion retention as a key theme to really get the revenue up. Interesting. Does it reflect your experiences, Rahul and Avinath?
Yeah, I could take it up. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, what was getting mentioned is about how you're doing on the digital and the benefit of the digital transformation earlier probably was slow, but with COVID pandemic, those were fully into there, they got the benefit and you ask for more, right? So that's a very natural thing. What I have seen in our cases, and not just Samsung, but in general of the device-centric world, many of us were fully onto the stores earlier. Let's say 10 years back, if you go, it was just the stores. There was no online stories, right? How you sell, how you do things, and even services and everything. You have to go physically somewhere to get it done. From there, some of the other people have also moved maybe a little bit more online. You asked the question, what worked, what didn't work. Now, online discounts, when it went deeper, the offline people were not very happy because I'm maintaining a stores and you are giving it in a lower price through some other channel at the end, the consumers, then how do I survive? So that kind of sentiments to how do you bring both of them and online, offline? I think the COVID time, what we saw is it became omnichannel. Yeah, I mean, obviously during this period, online worked, but I think the offline people also educated themselves. Maybe starting point is offline, but then can you take it to online for the final services and still give the similar rates? And companies like ours also learned how to position and what is the right pricing points to do it so that both parties could be there. So I think the point I'm trying to make is people had this different journey starting points of online or offline, and now it's all omni-channel and everybody has a mix and we don't need to do a separate pricing point. So this equilibrium, the new equilibrium point is something that has emerged over time. And I believe, on top of all the other points that I mentioned, like customer services, now we can do even online. You can check if your mobile, if you hold it, I can test it and give you a price quote, not even visiting the shop saying, if I want to do a replacement, what price would I like to offer? So these kinds of things is a real benefit of the digital transformations. And this omni-channel journey is a very solid one, and it will take us to the next step.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think also I'm gonna pick up on one theme here, the omni-channel idea. And I think the increased relevance of offline assets in that process actually makes you as a, want to say, old school player much more attractive as well in this landscape again, if you have your online game under control. So very, very good point. Rahul, what's your views on this?
Yeah, so in the industrial space, right? So I think industrial is probably the other end of the continuum versus, let's say, what Rohit talked about, where the adoption is probably among the highest, and industrial is usually the a bit of laggard in terms of technology adoption, primarily because of the complexity of operations, people, all of that's involved. Now, so one of the things that we saw, particularly in the heavy industrial space, was that COVID every kind of forced everybody to cut down on the staff that could be permitted in the factories or in the plants, etc. Right. So one of the big themes that started coming up, which obviously existed before, but the adoption suddenly accelerated, was that of remote operations. Right? Do you actually need all your experts to be at site? So let's say if there is a large manufacturer with multi-site, multi-location, multi-plant kind of operations, and each plant would also have its own technology differences and nuances, how do you really work through that kind of a situation? And if you have got, let's say, 5 experts on a certain space, how do they move around 7 plants or 9 plants? They would not be able to, given the restrictions. So can we centralize the operations? Can there be a remote kind of working setup where, let's say, I am at the field and you're at a central control room, and I'm able to relay what I see here as a problem, and you're able to guide me in terms of what needs to be done. Now, those, while sound simple, I mean, it's like getting on a video call with your mom, right? But that's in the industrial space, it gets slightly complicated because of the zone issues in terms of safety, etc. So there are hazardous zones, the zone categorization. Not all devices are permitted in all kind of zones, right? So those things come up, and then how much data because a lot of plants may not actually be on Wi-Fi altogether. Cellular may be weak. So how do you relay data? Can I relay a video, or do I do it over picture? Should I describe, right? So those things suddenly would crop up as bottlenecks. And the good part is that over this last 1.5 years, 2 years kind of journey, the industry has taken a big leap in this direction. In fact, what I'm talking about is something that most customers who are technology adopters are actually doing. Right, and let's not also kind of get this impression that it's only the larger players who are doing. In fact, particularly in India, where I think people get technology quickly, right? So even the smaller players, smaller plants, some of the SMB segment, as we call them, small and medium scale businesses, they are quite tech savvy and are able to actually quickly do some of these things. And the number of pilots that are happening in the industry today on various types of use cases around making this remote operation a reality, plus also managing competency at an organization level, right? How do you really channelize your centers of excellence, maybe located at one location across your enterprise? I think those are things that are working at an amazing level. Technologies like cloud and AI ML getting far ahead also is helping the enablement of these. But I think so we are at that kind of a stage where a lot is happening, and I think some of the real results in terms of business impact, the numbers would probably be seen in a few years' time. But then so much happening in industrial space, I think these are exciting times.
Yeah, no, I think great to hear that, and I think also a good theme on the ability to collaborate much more seamlessly now,
yes.
Which I think in the B2B space obviously is hugely relevant, versus always having to send your field force out or do an actual physical trip. I think all our lives have changed in that regard over the last 2 years. Quite
and if you see the key theme that cuts across all of these, any adoption that happens of technology, the key theme would always be centered around efficiency, productivity, safety, and you'll see how these things get enabled through all of this. In fact, some of the latest conversations around, say, sustainability, net zero, all of it is actually being enabled by digital transformation, because the first step of getting to net zero or carbon neutrality or your sustainability journey is to first measure what you're doing, right? So I think that itself is a huge challenge, a huge task. And I think the amount of action again that's going on there is huge. So as I said, exciting times.
No, I think that's a great point. I think also around sustainability net zero, I think the amount of new business opportunities that are emerging, to your point, just on measurement and then on addressing the root cause is tremendous, both in the B2B and B2C space. And Rahul, kind of going to Rohit and Alok afterwards again, but kind of keen to also continue with you quickly on the next theme wanted to dive in a bit, which is the question of new revenue streams or actually completely new business models potentially for companies. And I think we spent some time now talking around what we saw working on accelerating existing revenue. But we also see a lot of truly new business models coming up, and both kind of close related adjacencies. And Alok, I'd love to get your views on this in a minute on the Samsung story, where I think there's a lot you can do on just around the device, quite closely linked. But Rahul, you were also referring to industrial companies going into software, which I think is a very interesting topic. I think it's this whole shift to services has been underway for a while, but kind of going from a box to a software piece, I'm sure is an interesting transition. So I'd love to get your views, what you've seen there, what has worked, where companies have struggled.
Yeah. So see, the key driver there is the ability to mine the IP that a lot of these players have actually gathered over decades of operations, right? And that information to be analyzed, channelized, synthesized, I think the technology was not up there to handle that kind of data, right? What we call as big data. I think we were not there in terms of technology, and over the last few years, those capabilities have really come up. Now that IP, so a simple example of it is, let's say a large chemicals manufacturer, for instance, would have so much learning coming out of their 2-3 decades, 4 decades of operations. Can they use that and maybe productize it in the form of IP, which can be used by, say, new entrants or smaller players to improve their efficiency today? And they don't have to go through that learning curve of 40 years and learn it by themselves, right? So, and that is the big driver. Now, the business model here could be you give it as a service, you create a software out of it, which kind of helps people analyze and use or maybe benchmark their operations against something which is, say, a standard. So those kind of business models are possible. They're early days here. And by the way, it's not very new. Some of the in the oil and gas space, some of the bigger players like, say, Chevron and Exxon always used to have a bit of technology that they would license out to players. Now, I think what we are seeing is a similar thing happening at a bigger scale, enabled by technology and digital. And I think that to me is something which is going to be an additional revenue stream for the companies who have this rich IP or rich data available within themselves. And you already, I mean, I would not be naming customers who are already in this journey and we are working with. But then what I can tell you definitely is that this is something where when we go at an enterprise level, talk to CXOs, this is definitely top of the mind for most of them today, right? Mining their data, creating IP out of it, because this is gold, right? This is gold.
Very interesting. No, actually, I would love to kind of, Rohit, get your quick views on this, on the data mining side and kind of building businesses out of this. I suspect this is something that is quite close to your heart and something you spend a fair amount of time on as well, Rohit.
Absolutely. I think big data is helping us a lot. And, I earlier talked about the automation which we're doing, and also as a part of that, the retention strategy which we are creating. So as a part of the retention strategy, you get all kinds of people, and, we are able to, while we work on a more of a freemium model there, but we are able to get a lot of information about different segments and markets. which helps us really identify the problems and the opportunity areas where there is a lot of interest. For example, if we are a hard skill player, if you will, where we have programs like data science, digital marketing, software development, etc. But in some areas where we tested a freemium model to offer some kind of soft skills to the users, and we found a lot of interest there as well, which could be different to the hypothesis we may have. So such avenues allow us to go deeper into the data, carve out the segments, and really be able to build new revenue streams out of it. And for that, we have a two-pronged strategy where some of them we create internally, and if we believe that we do not have the expertise, the integrations becoming so open and so easy nowadays, it's easier to go inorganic, find someone who is not able to scale the business but has good technology sitting with them and a good product sitting with them. It's easier to merge or acquire those companies and integrate to offer a new product line which you can. And with the boundaries between industries just completely being hazy, it's just crazy how different technology companies who would have started with a different core services altogether are moving into services which would not be in their zone. We know the case of Apple and Kodak, where Apple has now become the synonym for cameras or high quality pictures and movies being shot on them. Who would have thought of it? And similarly, in our case, I think while this is more about understanding from big data and getting new innovations in the place, there is a lot in terms of how do we broaden our horizon and put a mission statement. So while we started with serving the working professionals who wanted to upskill themselves, as we looked at it and we looked at lifelong learning, we put our mission as anyone who is between 80 to 60 years, and numbers are just proxy, but essentially who is starting to get into undergraduation and until they retire. Any lifelong learning experience is something which Upgrad as an ecosystem can provide, and that's where we look at new revenue stream. Some of the acquisitions we have done over the last 1 year, where it was not part of the core but serving the mission we have, that helps us open new revenue streams. And similarly, within our core, we have realized that we started off as an online model, but there is a huge demand for studying abroad, and which is a new sort of adjustment to the product and a new service which has come up, where half the time learners are studying online for a year, and for the next year they are going outside of India or outside of their base countries to study in a different university, which is a blended model which has come up, and that's really proving to be a very, very potential growth stream for us on the revenue side.
Yeah, it's been great to see the experimentation you're doing there. And Dr. Allen, I'm keen to get your views on this as well. I assume you took a little offense when Rohit mentioned that Apple has become synonymous with great cameras, because clearly that is Samsung. But outside of that, I mean, keen to hear views on like what you've experimented with on your revenue streams and what has worked for you.
Sure. And since Rohit and Rahul both mentioned about either AI or data and automations, so I think let me talk in two parts. One, just the single device itself. And what we additionally have is lots of sensors. In today's camera is one type of sensors, but then there is PPG sensors, there is light sensors, many things that are there inside. So we know exactly what's going on. In fact, I could, if I see internal plots of the data of the sensors, I could even characterize, if I wanted to do a PhD on people's behavior, we could even go to that far. But coming back to the revenue streams, simple thing like a feature, suppose I'm inside a house or in the night or I'm bright sunlight, I could detect and I could adjust the brightness of the screen accordingly so that, I don't have to change every time. So this is a feature. Obviously, you can't monetize from there. But when you have many such sensors together and things like not just smartphones, but the wearables that are come, there are many sophisticated algorithms that are coming up for the health monitoring. And we have Samsung Health already sitting, partnering with others and being able to do BP measurements, ECG, and things like that. And it will only grow over time. So what's happening? This is creating a new business model because the insurance companies are very keen. But earlier, the data was not sufficient, 1 or 2 points, not accurate enough. So therefore, they could not rely on that. And they had to do a flat charging for everybody. But now actually a person in good health could have a different premium like the person who is not. And immediately you don't have to do very minutely, like no claim bonus on automotive insurance if you have not charged it. Similar to that, if you are in good health, obviously you can have 3 brackets of insurance premium. You can start like that and then over time fine tune. So I think I see these sensors, wearables, smartphones, getting the data, partnering with this health insurance company. So this is one new revenue stream that I could consider. The other part that we see is from the connectedness. So we have Smart Things, which is a platform which is connecting the smart home, all the digital appliances, and 200 million devices are connected today. Now, one is to give them the service and just the power of the data itself for the individual devices. But as a company, the concept of upselling or cross-selling comes into play. And I don't know whether you will still call it a new revenue stream, but to us, you would not have got that business otherwise. And it's not a typical upgradation. It's a new stream, that will help us to have more engagement with people, get at the right time, when they want to replace. And I could know that, if people in the world are having lights and other kinds of home devices, what do they buy next? Typically, we have seen if this is the first device, then 20% of the people buy device Y after that. And so if somebody has bought this, we could even prompt it, do it, or if they have those devices they are not using, I can tell them how rest of the world is using it effectively and grow on the consumer experience. So this concept of whether it's box selling devices or increasing experience or timely informations to be able to, that is also falling under the experience growth. I think these are things that we could do. So I'll stop here with these 2 examples. One of the additional in the health insurance side, and one is from the connectedness, what we could benefit from.
And Dr. Day, just for comfort, I use a Samsung device.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Rohit.
Good save there, Rohit. Great. No, I think those were excellent examples, and I was particularly struck by also some of the mechanics you employed and used here. And I think, Rohit, you were alluding to the use of M&A to build the capabilities in-house. To Dalit, you were referring to the idea of, I think, partnering with insurance companies to open up new revenue streams. And I think that comes to the next topic I'd just love to get your views on, which is, this is obviously not easy. Like, it's new approaches to how you sell things. It's actually reinventing business models. It's realigning internally because you need a team to go after this. You probably need budget to go after this, which is always everybody's favorite infight. I'd love to get your views on kind of what has worked for you, how you've made this happen internally, because experimenting with insurance companies, driving an M&A process for a company that may be a great fit for you, but may actually be quite different to what you're doing, not straightforward. So I'd love to get your views, and maybe kind of Rohit, I'll just staying with you for a second and also get Rahul's views on this. So Rohit, if you want to share first, and then maybe I'll let Matthew add to that.
Sure, absolutely. I think just from there are two perspectives on organizational resistance. I think one is the fact that the change today is the only constant, and that's the cliche everyone has heard. But the skills required to make the change, because we are changing so fast. Earlier, bigger companies who have taken a particular mode or an area of expertise, and they have just grown, developed, penetrated on that particular area. Those skills, while these are good at a certain level, now the skills are changing, where the demand today is to be more fungible, more agile, and to be ready for change every minute. And the other side of the spectrum is the resistance, which is the usual human resistance to change, to anything. And therefore, I think there are two opposite forces which is making the change difficult, but it's the reality. And therefore the fight is between not just overcoming the change from the perspective of making that happen, but also having talent who can make that change. And on the organizational side, I think what has and we have been in a constant change mode over the past 5 to 6 years. There are two ways on which we look at it. One is the fact that how do you build scalable system in a modularized fashion, and there you have to take a very it's more art than science, I guess, where you have to take an intuitive call of the compromise between quick to market versus building it right. Many companies in their growth phase today work on, and I'm talking from a technology perspective, they put everything in a monolith, they grow, and at a point in time, everyone goes through that cycle of rewriting the whole tech again, and taking that big punt of slowing the systems down for some time. And while we have seen some examples where people have built modularized system from start, and they may not have, and the investment and the time is of course higher, but they have been able to scale very quickly as they go about it. And when those scalable systems are in place, the resistance we have seen is relatively lesser. But if I take an example of our own organization, where we started off with as an online company, but as a part of the learner journey, there is an application which a learner fills, and after that, based on the eligibility of the learner, and if there are eligibility tests related to it, they go through a shortlisting process. And for a period of time, we had shortlisting done by an army of people who were doing the shortlisting, and eventually it plateaued at a time, because you can't scale it at a level how the top of the funnel was growing. And then we had to take a punt and make shortlisting automated. And by doing that, there was a huge resistance in terms of moving that out of the human angle of it, and making it happen through technology. So the two challenges we faced there, and I think we were lucky in a way that because we were growing, we had enough place where it's not just about making automation, but how do you if there are people in the organization, how do you find other roles for them, or make their services utilized in other areas, and also picking up larger areas which could help unlock a lot of opportunity for the company to grow it where humans cannot do, and technology comes in and helps you do that immediately.
Yeah, no, I think a great example also kind of like how you deal with the organizational displacement it can create. So very good points. Alexander, do you want to add something to this, or give you something?
Sure. Yeah, no, I was just trying to say your other parts of the questions, that the big organizations, so size of the organizations and how do you maneuver for M&A and all kinds of things, partnerships, and who is going to earn what revenue. So all of those aspects of it. So the challenge that we see, and I'm not saying just Samsung, but talking to many people that in bigger organizations. So what's your core and what's your periphery? This is what I want to do it myself, and this is what I would like to partner because they are strong and they know what to do it. So that's one part of the story. And big organizations always have some entity who is doing piecemeal of the other things, right? So to draw that line and to make sure, the IPs of each one is respected in a right way. So that's, I think, is one journey. And more so, if there's a short term that I'm going to be not doing, maybe engage somebody, but long term, I have a plan. So how do you cut that out, communicate it very clearly that this is a 3 years deal and we have these aspirations, but today we do it like that. And then who is the front ending? Who is earning the revenue in a revenue share? Sometimes we might be the main channel and earning the revenue and paying a pie to the other partners. Or in some cases, if it's a very service oriented and ad platform and things like that, that possibility is coming from another source of revenue and then going back and flowing it. So I think taking stock of this whole thing and then agreeing to that, respecting that, maneuvering inside to make that happen with everybody's consent. This is a gigantic task. And then if we can take it, and leadership is all about making that happen. Sometimes we see roadblocks and slowness and things like that in general in such bigger things, but mostly I think we are able to break through. And if people can see that you are able to monetize or you're able to grow consumer experience, so pegging points are these. I mean, obviously they're not exclusive. Consumer experience has to be there all the time. But if it's not increasing, but at the same level you are able to monetize, new or old, whichever ways, then that's a good answer. That's brings that consensus very, very quickly. Or, if you can quantify the consumer experience. Earlier we talked about data, but the data is data, but how do you define that, the service experience level? This, if we can objectify, it is quite a lot today subjective, but if we can objectify, then we have a point there, and possibly, again, the consensus comes quicker.
Yeah, very interesting. No, I think great to hear about your experience there as well. Rahul, keen to get your thoughts here, because I have to imagine that in an industrial context, this is even harder than for some of the newer tech companies that I think Rohit and Gosal represent.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, that's right. But one of the interesting things, and I was listening to both of them very keenly, I think the common element here is resistance from whom, right? From people, the human element. And I think that's kind of common across across the size of the company or the nature of the business, I guess. I think, but to your point, yes, because some of the companies, the way of working, and also it's got to do with the demography in terms of the workforce, right? So all of that comes in together, and there is obviously always a change, a resistance to change. And I think one of the key things that companies that are doing it successfully have realized quickly is that digitalization is not about technology, or it's not an IT play, right? Or it's not even an OT play. It is actually a cultural shift in an organization. It's actually changing the way you go about doing your work. So I think that's an important piece, and companies that have realized that are approaching it from a change management perspective, which includes the people side of it, and also would mean that some of the people would need reskilling, or there could be newer kinds of roles that will get originated out of this whole journey of digitalization. So I think so some of those learnings have come in over a period of time, and people have, or the companies have been able to do it. I want to pick up one point that Rohit mentioned, and I think it was very, very pertinent, and it has its own place in the industrial setup as well, which is around the technologies or the products being enterprise grade, right? The way you architect them, in a sense that you can actually scale it up quickly. And I think that has been a key to success in the industrial setup. Otherwise, in a large organization, touching every plant, touching every site, and every aspect of operations is a journey of decades, right? And I'm not saying enterprise grade makes it a snap of a moment, but what it still does is it cuts it down to maybe a few months or years. And therefore, it's important that the technology is also able to match that kind of enterprise level expectations. And once the two meet, which is an intent from the organization to address it as a change management and cultural shift than just a technology shift. And then if you get the right set of technologies and products to support your journey, products that are enterprise grade, scalable, I think then you've got it. So that is the key to really manage this whole resistance. One of the key things, and again, Rohit alluded to this, is and I refer to it as pilots in terms of technology pilots. So you start small, get the buy-in, demonstrate results, and then you scale it up because, and I'm sure it's similar everywhere, the kind of investment that goes in, if you have to scale up at an enterprise level, is huge, right? So you cannot go wrong after making that investment. And therefore, and let's also not think that the resistance is only from the user side of it. The resistance could also be from the management or the leadership, because it will also mean a certain amount of investment, and there would always be options to put that money or that dollar in, right? So therefore, demonstrating the benefit quickly is important, and you do it in a piloted way, and then you scale it up, and that scale up should then be fast so that the results and the benefits are realized across the organization. So I think I kind of mentioned 3-4 things, but all of this comes together for an organization to have a successful change management, if I may use that term again, in this journey. Otherwise, I mean, there have been multiple examples of stuff that has been started but did not see the light of the day. And by the way, even within some of the companies that have done it well, there have been instances of use cases tackled, or instances of problems that were picked up to solve for that could not really be successful. So it has been a mixed bag even for some of the people who are doing well.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Rahul. Actually, you kind of almost immediately answered my last question I had, which was what advice would you give other companies embarking on this, which sounds like this is your piece of advice, which I think is quite valuable.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I mean, since we are on that, maybe let me take it first. I think the important piece there is to realize that it's a journey, right? So you're not going to be there in the first day. It's a journey. You have to persist with it, and that requires a certain amount of belief that what you're embarking on is the right thing to do, right? The details of it would get figured out. There will be points where you will have to pivot. You'll have to be agile enough to really make those shifts along the way. But as long as you're convinced that belief is there, that you're in it for the long haul, and you treat it as a journey, I think it has yielded results for companies that we partner with in this space. It's only when we try to solve isolated problems that problem arises, because then what you have is, people use that term a lot in our industry, which is you have a museum of technologies, right? And then suddenly you have 10 of them, and these technologies don't talk to each other, and now you want to scale up, and you have nowhere to go. You don't know how to really access information from one set of say softwares or your technologies to the other, and the real benefit which comes at the enterprise level is not realized. And then you end up kind of redoing the whole thing. And I mean, the challenges are enormous. You get a system integrator to really read information from everything, create a data lake again. So all of those things are enormous costs that would come up if you don't really think about it in the right way right from the beginning. So I think from those perspectives, I think a bigger picture is important right from the beginning. That's point number one. Treating it as a journey is important. You have to persist with it. And I think there has to be a certain amount of belief within the organization that this will yield results. and therefore you persist with it. And of course, the last one, which is kind of beaten down to death in terms of conversations around this topic, is being agile, being able to pivot along the journey. So yeah, those would be some of my thoughts in terms of what do you really do to get it right.
Yeah, no, I think some great points there. I think the memorable phrase I will take away that I hadn't heard before is Museum of Technologies. I can certainly attest to some of my clients looking like this. So interesting turn of phrase. Rohit, do you want to build on this? Any advice you would have for companies on embarking on this?
Yeah, I think I have 3 points to make here. First and foremost is the first principles approach, which is tried and tested. That what problem is it solving, and whether the journey you're taking or the changes you're making, is it improving the customer experience in any way, or is it saving you cost, or is it helping you in revenue? And both of these could be because it is scalable and helps you in revenue or opens up new revenue streams. The second is that keep the eye on competitor, but don't blindly follow them. It's one of the principles Jeff Bezos also talks about, that's important to look at what is there in the market, what different folks are doing, but you don't know in your circumstances whether that will work or not, or whether it's working for others or not. Because you talk about stuff, the results only follow, and any new thing in the market does not mean that has been tried and tested. The third thing is the fact that technology is not the goal but an enabler. So just looking at great technologies like AR, VR, or blockchain, etc. They will keep coming. There will be more technologies coming in the future, but what use cases does it solve for you? And how does technology really enable things rather than having a technology which you can speak highly of? And there have been a lot of instances, AR VR has been, or AI being talked about for the last 10-12 years, but all the advancements in AI has essentially happened in the supervised AI, which is typically teaching this is a cat, this is not a cat, and that's the basic example you've given, and then scaling on that repetitive tasks. How can you make that smarter and do it faster? But there hasn't been too much advancement in stuff like the general AI, which is about how humans behave and how can technology replicate that. So I think technologies will keep coming and going, but what we have to focus on is how does it help?
Yeah, no, some excellent points also kind of in terms of how we should think about this. Adnan, any closing words from you? Any other advice you would add to this?
Sure. I think Rahul pegged the right point, in terms of people and their divergence of thoughts and the culture part of it and the resistance. So that's on bottom portion of it. And Rohit mentioned about, the end goal of consumer experience and the pricing, cost, effectiveness, efficiency, all of those are the end objectives. So the point I would like to add is that is the leadership role, that how do you the organizations, how do you understand why people are not agreeing, what are they not agreeing upon, right? Getting to the crux of it and synthesizing those. There are many excellent points that would be there why they are objecting to it, and then there are some frivolous comments. So I think understanding it well and the tools that we have in our hand, whether the technology is going to be obsolete, museum of technology that talked about, or whether the business model is not appropriate. Are we ahead of time? Are we just following competition where we shouldn't be following? I think many of these points that came up, these are, in my opinion, are the tools that the leader has, and the ability to synthesize, to understand well, to find which tool would work and make them, a consensus view. Then only I think we would be able to deliver, and we are there to deliver. So we can't say, because of X or Y or this or that, it didn't work. This is our job to make that happen. So I will stop at that. Thank you.
Great. I think this was a great closing word, actually. I think the role of leadership and really shaping this journey, making sure we're in the right path. And some excellent comments also. I definitely learned a lot today from this group. It was very interesting dialogue. I think we did not ultimately solve if Samsung or Apple makes better cameras, but outside of this, definitely a lot of good ideas on revenue stream innovation through technology. And yeah, Rahul, Rohit, I really appreciate you making the time for this. Very interesting discussion and great to have had this discussion with you.
Hello and welcome to ET India Boardroom. On this panel, we will be discussing developing cybersecurity expertise of the corporate boards. Our panelists for today are Kalyan Mupaneni, founder and CEO of Pi Data Centers, Pavan Dugal, Chairman, International Commission Cybersecurity Law, Priya Kandur, CTO and Vice President of Infrastructure Management and Cybersecurity at Happiest Minds Technologies, and Anand Agarwal, former group CEO and board member at Sterlite. And today the topic of discussion is developing cybersecurity expertise of corporate boards. So thank you all very much for joining me, and I look forward to the discussion today. And what I was hoping to do to start with was to go around the group and have each of you give perhaps a brief introduction and then give your thoughts around what the role is of corporate boards on topics such as cybersecurity to help us frame the discussion for the audience today. So Priya, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure, Pelu. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Priya Kanduri. I am the CTO for Infrastructure and Security Services business within Happiest Minds, and I also head the Cybersecurity Services business unit within Happiest Minds. Prior to Happiest Minds, I worked in Wipro, again in cybersecurity field. So overall, 20 plus years of dealing with cybersecurity services and various program executions and service definitions at various capacities. That's my background, and I've worked with customers in India and with customers across Europe, globally as well. I would like to start off saying this is really a very interesting and very relevant topic that we're going to discuss today. And that's a new trend that we have seen, increasing involvement of boards within cybersecurity programs and policies and governance and definition, and increasing awareness as well as the expansion of board to include cybersecurity. That's something that I've not just personally seen within Happiest Minds as an organization, but with a lot of customers that I work with as well. And it makes complete sense because who is mostly affected when there is a breach or an attack eventually is not just the IT security engineer or the IT security department. It does percolate all the way up to the boards, and they are the ones who are eventually responsible for reputation of an organization. They are responsible for survival of the organization, profitability of the organization. So it makes complete sense that they take responsibility of cybersecurity as well. And we all understand no matter what we do, an organization is never 100% protected, which means there is all the more reason for boards to take responsibility of cybersecurity initiatives. And what would that typically involve? It's based on what I've seen in my experience, and also what I know as someone who has been incorporating cybersecurity controls and programs and governance into an organization's ongoing operations. What I would envisage as board taking part is definitely in terms of having cybersecurity built into the overall enterprise risk management framework, and not just leave it to IT security. It should be at all levels, have very close visibility of and even one-to-ones with IT security department, what's happening and how cybersecurity risks are being integrated into the overall organization-wide risk framework, risks identified, reported, accepted, mitigated. That whole framework having a direct visibility is something that would really increase the importance of cybersecurity for an organization, that level of oversight. And number two that I would like to see is boards, everybody, not just the cyber savvy person on the board, but everybody being completely aware of the regulatory implications of the particular industry that they are in and the cyber risks that that relate to their company, which is still many people are not fully aware. You know, a GDPR, a data breach is not something that just relates to one particular department. It does apply to the whole board, and being completely aware of what it means to them is very important. And then and then a couple of other things are definitely, being direct visibility into audits, what's happening, what's the outcome of the audit, have we cleared it, what are the actions. Every audit response is a direct responsibility of the board. Again, have them closed, make sure there is sufficient staff and budgets allocated to cybersecurity program, make it definitely part of the quarterly reviews. Are we rolling out sufficient policies? Be aware of all the cyber risks and make sure they are part of the implementation program. That level of visibility is what today's enterprises really need.
Thank you for highlighting these important roles of the board, especially around the issue of how it relates to the broader risk management framework. Let me ask Pavan to comment now. And Pavan, would appreciate a brief intro, but then would love to hear more from you, especially on this topic of the broader issues of risks that you see happening at boards and how that relates, and what the role of the board would then be from that issue of risk on out.
Today, it's a different world that we are living in. I am Dr. Pavan Dugal, Advocate, Supreme Court of India, specializing in cyber law and cybercrime, and Chairman of the International Commission on Cybersecurity Law. It's a different world that we're living in. We are talking so much about cybersecurity, and often we are paying lip service to cybersecurity without even understanding that cybersecurity is intrinsically linked with the risk mitigation strategies that need to be adopted. Well, if the world has lost more than $6 trillion thanks to these cybersecurity breaches in 2021, and we are poised to lose more than $8 trillion to these cybersecurity breaches in 2022, these figures need to be serving as great wake-up alarm calls for all stakeholders to inculcate cybersecurity as a way of life. Let's remember the fact that law, from a legal standpoint, we haven't made much progress. Internationally, there's no one international cybersecurity law in place. Therefore, given this policy vacuum at the international level, different countries have already begun to start coming up with dedicated national cybersecurity laws. Now, these are very broad. Let's look at the laws of China, Singapore, Vietnam, Australia, and we begin to start seeing that these are laws not just for promoting and protecting cybersecurity, but ultimately even for extending the state agenda and for expanding the cause of cyber sovereignty. But ultimately, when I look at the rights, duties, and responsibilities of various stakeholders in these respective legislations, one finds that ultimately the law wants to put responsibility on cybersecurity on digital users, on corporates, that they take effective steps to mitigate their potential risks. Now, there are various mechanisms available. You can either go through the route of the cyber insurance methodology, which is also something where countries are slowly going forward in hesitant mode. But most of the time, it's in the form of mandating reasonable security practices and procedures that entities need to actually follow on a proactive basis in order to not just protect their own data, but also protect sensitive personal data. But a lot of people still see cybersecurity and risk mitigation as two separate buckets. But ultimately, I believe these are two sisters who are joined by the same umbilical cord. It's only a way how we look at the perspectives on these two sisters. But I think the need for capacity building is one of the key thrust areas that we really need to specifically focus on, because this is one area where we have found out that people are pretty much clueless as to what they need to do, whether it's important influential people, whether it's big companies, whether it's top managements. See, the problem is till such time you don't get deterrent punishment or you don't get deterrent legal action against companies or their top managements. The normal message goes on is that we can actually subscribe to the Indian Jugaad school of management and yet continue to keep on managing our stuff as and when we arrive at the appropriate bridge. But I think the mindset needs to be changing, and for that, all stakeholders have to contribute.
Thank you, Pavan. This issue of needing to be proactive about this is obviously key, and obviously being able to navigate the different legal frameworks that are in place is also important. Priya also spoke about this issue of being able to raise the awareness and the education level, and to your point, it needs to be something that's built into the way that companies do business. Let me ask Kalyan, in his role as the CEO of Pi Data Centers, to both introduce himself and also as from a chief executive's perspective. Kalyan, tell us about how you have prepared your board in this sense, and how do you share with them the responsibility that they have in supporting you and your team in implementing cybersecurity controls?
Yeah, thanks, Velu. Hello, everyone. So I'm Kalyan, founder and CEO of Pi Data Centers. We are, as part of the intro, we are a cloud and a data center company spread across customers across India, several hundreds of customers from all walks of life, all industries. So it's a unique problem that we see and deal with on a daily basis as we work with our customers. So I think to one of the core questions that you had, Velu, is it starts with the culture on the board, right? I think we have seen things change over the last few years, but still, I think, are we there yet, especially in the Indian context? Probably not. I think things have definitely improved. Boards have started paying attention, prioritizing this. But I think, as Priya alluded to earlier, I think setting up this framework is extremely important, and having a monitoring process in place is extremely important. Having people accountable within the organization is very important, and also backing them up with and giving the authority to make things transparent as they happen, as they unfold in the organizations. Because in the world we live in, I mean, as Pawan said, I mean, I think we live in a very different world today, and things are happening as we speak. And I think the only way is to take accountability, to be transparent, to accept things as they happen, and then come up with solutions, innovative solutions, and take practical steps and measures. And there is no, this is one thing that I tell our customers, is there is no one size that fits all, because cybersecurity is a very unique problem to every unique organization. So they have to come up with what they really need, what their priorities are, what business the organization is in. Then you come up with your set of priorities, you come up with the design principles for your cybersecurity framework, then you work on implementing them. It comes with a lot of cost. Not everybody can afford everything. So it's very important that the board prioritizes with the help of their technical team on what are those important top 3 or top 5 items that they need to prioritize from a cybersecurity framework perspective, and then implement them. And that can be a number of things. I think as we go on, we can discuss, but I think this level of maturity, transparency, and accountability is extremely important at the board.
Wonderful. So, Kalyan, as you've mentioned, this issue of having the transparency and the visibility at the board level is obviously super important. Anand, you've had the unique position of being able to both serve in the CEO role and have a number of different board experiences. Would love to hear from you about how you have taken on the responsibility of educating your fellow board members around these topics, and also what types of systemic approaches you may have seen around how the boards are made aware of how to contend with these types of risks. How has the issue been presented to them? What have you seen that's worked? And would love to use that as a way of getting your introduction, and also then segueing into some issues that we'll talk about next around specific activities that you all have seen as examples of what boards have done well. Anand?
Sure, Velu. So thanks for having me here. I've been, till recently, as you said, I've seen this issue from various vantage points. I've been the CEO, being responsible and accountable for various issues, cybersecurity being one of them. I've been on multiple boards, so being accountable from a board perspective, and of late, I'm advising one of the companies which actually deal with cybersecurity products and solutions. So I've looked at this issue from various vantage points, and I kind of agree with what Kalyan just mentioned, that the awareness at the board level has been increasing over the last several years. Till 5 years ago, at least in some of our boards, we would see that info security and cybersecurity was just an annual presentation which would happen by the CIO. And now it's become something which the risk management committee sees it with help from an external agency, but the cyber literacy aspect is still to catch up, and the rate of acceleration of the risk is faster than the capability that is getting built up at the board level. So I think the biggest aspect is the awareness on the importance of cybersecurity on the board. And I see it from both perspectives. I see the fact that we have to see this not only as a risk, but also from an asset perspective. The cyber assets which are there, that perspective is seen less in the board, that the data of the organization, the intellectual property, the trade secrets which are there, how can they be starting to be valued on the balance sheet? So the opportunity essentially which is there of valuing the cyber assets, and since boards tend to look at both aspects, they tend to look at the opportunity aspect as well as the risk aspect. I think that appreciation, as we start getting in, the tools that start getting applied towards managing and mitigating the risk start getting more and more relevant and valid. There are multiple sort of approaches and concepts which have been used over the last several years, at least in my experience, from getting it on the risk register, starting to do a framework in terms of criticality of information, in terms of similar to ABC category of assets, doing a vulnerability analysis, which assets are more vulnerable, whether it's the field teams, whether it is legacy equipment, realizing that a box solution is not good enough to apply, realizing that it is not the CIO or CSO's responsibility. And all this can then be put into a framework, what Priya was describing, into a good metric, where you start scoring yourself, you start grading yourself. It can be a very simple grade from A to D, but that starts providing a perspective at the board level as to where you are compared to whichever frame you look at, whether it's a local frame, whether it's a global frame, whether it's an industry frame. So the frameworks and the concepts and tools are available. I think awareness that it is a critical asset, awareness that this is the accountability and responsibility at the board level, and knowing that framework can be used to monitor that. I think those are the steps which are getting applied, but the pace can be hastened.
Super. So, Anand, as you've stated, we have a world where boards are becoming more aware of these issues. These topics are, of course, appearing in the press, and from what we read in the experiences all around. Pavan, you put some numbers around this, right? Trillions of dollars at risk in terms of the opportunities that are out there and the responsibility. Priya, you did a nice job of reminding us that this needs to fit into the broader risk framework, and it's just one of the things that needs to come up. As we go through and we look across these issues, let me turn back to Pavan to start with on the next topic, which is from the perspective of India and the issues of the state of the legislative frameworks in India, the concerns of regulators in India, the concerns of the public and investors in India. Any guidance that you have or highlights that you have that you would share with other board members on what types of things they should be aware of and what types of asks they should be making to the line management of the company as they review topics around risk and security? Pavan, let's start with you and we'll go around again.
In the Indian context, we need to appreciate a couple of things. Number one, India is seeing a huge and a unique policy vacuum. India does not have any dedicated cybersecurity law in place. India also does not have in place a dedicated law on data protection. In addition, India also lacks a dedicated law on privacy. So given this unique absence of these three crucial legislations, it's a very fertile ecosystem for potential exposure for corporates and their boards. Why? Because you don't know from where you're going to be hit. Right now, the only thing that's available is the Indian Cyber Law, which is the Indian Information Technology Act 2000, a 22-year-old legislation that we only amended once in 2008 after the Mumbai attacks. But this legislation, in the amendments in 2008, gave a very expansive definition of the term of cybersecurity. Further, some lip service provisions were added, but of crucial necessity for the boards is, even today, all your activities are governed under the Information Technology Act 2000 and rules and regulations made thereunder, including the 2011 rules and the Information Technology Rules 2021. As a board member, you need to understand that the moment your company is today dealing with data or information in the electronic form, specifically third-party data, and if it's dealing with personally identifiable data or sensitive personal data, there are bound to be legal ramifications for you and your company. The IT Act is ruthless. When I look at the IT Act and Section 85, it's very clear. It says if an offense or a contravention is committed by a company, then the entire top management of the company and also every person responsible for the day-to-day running of affairs of the company or management of its activities, whatever is applicable, shall also be deemed to have committed the said offense. So as board members, please realize if your company has committed a contravention or offense, you automatically are in the same category as that of a co-accused because you are also deemed to have committed the same offense. The good news is that the law provides you an exit door, as the law provides your company an exit door. A majority of companies today are dealing with third-party data. And the moment you handle or process third-party data, you become an intermediary under Section 21W of the IT Act. Under Section 79, 2C of the IT Act, you are mandated to exercise due diligence while you discharge your obligations under the law. A variety of these parameters of due diligence have been defined under the Information Technology Rules 2011 and the Information Technology Rules 2021. Now, it's your job as a board manager, as a board member, to see that whether your company is compliant with your requirements of due diligence. Because if you comply with these due diligence, the law gives you a fantastic getaway. The law says, if you comply with my rules and regulations and my provisions, I will give you the statutory exemption from legal liability, which means that anyone can sue you. But the law promises you that you cannot be sent to jail. You cannot be forced to pay 1 rupee damages by way of compensation. Now, that's the hallowed space that I would want your company to come in. But for that, it will be imperative that your company must have documented policies, processes, and procedures to show how it is complied with the exercise of due diligence under the IT Act and rules and regulations. My practical experience tells us that more than 9 out of 10 companies choose not to comply. Either they are not aware of it, or they feel that this is too much of a compliance cost, or that they will potentially be able to manage it by subscribing to the Indian Jugaad school of management. Though I think in the electronic ecosystem, Jugaad does not work. Why? Because the Indian penal code comes as a Damocles sword on your head, because they say the moment you do Jugaad, you would be creating false electronic records. And the moment you do that, that becomes electronic forgery, punishable with 7 years imprisonment and fine under Section 468 of the Indian Penal Code. So in a scenario like that, the only way of salvation for the board management says, please do your documented cyber law audits to find out what are your gap analysis. It's not that all companies are 100% compliant. Let's presume that. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's look at how much your company is compliant by doing a cyber law gap analysis. And after the gap analysis, whatever the gaps that come across, please fill them up and thereafter get a cyber law compliance report. That becomes your statutory standard legal documentation, which you can rely upon either before courts or law enforcement agencies in order to save yourself from exposure to legal consequences, both civil and criminal. That's one. Also remember that now the IT rules 2021 have changed the landscape for board members and the boards of management of companies. Rule 7 of these IT rules 2021 says that if you do not do these compliances and do not exercise due diligence, you be prepared for 2 kinds of consequences. Number one, the statutory exemption from legal liability that the law provides you is automatically snatched from you by operation of law. And number 2, you as a top management, as the board of management, are liable to be punished for offenses under the Information Technology Act 2000 and the Indian Penal Code. So now for the first time, your criminal liability decks have been cleared. So whether you like it or not, you can actually be sued at any point of time. Please, let's all remember the case of Twitter. Twitter was given 90 days to comply with the IT rules. They chose not to comply. And immediately, by virtue of the operations of these rules, their statutory exemption of legal liability was snatched. And they found that 4 different FIRs have been filed against them in 4 different states. And now they're all prosecuting those FIRs as accused. So I don't want companies to be on the position of an accused. It's better to be erring on the side of caution, doing your due diligence, ensuring that your company complies. If it doesn't, please allocate the appropriate resources and the mandates to do that. Otherwise, it's a big, tall order. My practical work in the Information Technology Act in the last 22 years has already taught me one key lesson, that the IT Act is like a whirlpool. If you're going to get sucked into this whirlpool, it's going to be years before you come out. And it could even potentially completely destroy your business, your reputation, and your various potential business prospects. So the better thing is to do your compliances. And as far as possible, as and when new law comes in, for example, the Personal Data Protection Bill is supposed to come in. India is now coming up with a national cybersecurity strategy this year. As and when new mandates come in, please comply with the same. And also, mind you, let's not shy away from reporting any cybersecurity breaches, because now non-reporting of cybersecurity breaches has actually been made an offense, punishable with imprisonment and fine for the top management. So ensure due diligence, caution as your only mantras to be your guiding lights moving forward. Thanks.
Pavan, great overview of what the state is now and what some of the responsibilities are that are put on boards for being able to go off and carry these things out in India and in the Indian context. I wonder if we could go to perhaps Anand next and ask about global issues that are warranting particular attention for Indian firms. Anand, as you've run global companies based in India, what are some of the things that you've had to do to kind of make yourself aware of the individual context in which your companies have done business and getting the type of guidance that somebody like Pavan can provide around the regulatory frameworks that you need to abide by in these different countries?
Sure. I mean, being in Europe clearly provided a great oversight in terms of GDPR regulations. So India, from that perspective, the regulations are low, but at the same time, we can see this as a opportunity that we can learn from the attacks that have happened to major global firms and take the right precautions. And that can be the responsibility of the boards right away while the regulation and legislation kind of follows that. We need not wait till a major corporate cyber attack happens. We, at the board level, what we've done is looked at it from both the perspectives, looked at it from the risk perspective, realizing that everything which is the IP, the trade secrets, the data are the assets very similar to the physical assets of the organization. And at the same time, just like you protect your physical assets, in the same way you need to protect the cyber assets. There is that high degree of awareness also coming in that cyber crime is getting industrialized. There are people who are kind of identifying the leaks, and then there are a different set of people who are kind of going in and going with ransomware. So essentially, what we with these sort of examples of what has happened globally in terms of whether it is the GDPR compliance, whether it is the attacks that have happened on global organizations, and it is no longer an issue which is pertaining to financial and banks institutions. It's happening to logistics companies. It's happened to manufacturers. It's happening across the board. And just by getting that perspective to both, we've seen that boards have started taking a higher degree of responsibility, a higher degree of awareness, and getting in the requisite cyber literacy. Like over time, we have seen that cyber literacy was outsourced. We got in consultants and got in auditors who would do that. But of late, we are seeing that just like you have within the board a very financial literate board member who looks at the audit, who chairs the audit committee. In the same way, cyber savvy and cyber literate board members are becoming a need of the board itself, because the value of the opportunity as well as the cost of the risk is too high for the board to ignore.
That's a great segue, Priya, I think, to a point that you had raised early on, which is, how do we go off and think about expanding the board to include people who bring these perspectives in? Would you like to share your thoughts on examples or situations that you've seen where the types of profiles of board members or experiences of board members who bring those perspectives to bear to increase the capability of the board at large, and in a sense, even perhaps help to inform their fellow board members and make them aware of some of these risks, especially from the context of both domestic and global legal requirements, Priya?
Yeah, definitely. Like Anand mentioned, having someone cyber savvy in the board definitely helps in terms of elevating the importance of cybersecurity, not just for the board, for the overall organization. And again, as Anand said, initially the boards were supposed to be financial savvy, and then we moved on to making them IT savvy. Now there is the current era is all about making them cyber savvy as well, which is as important as being finance savvy. Couple of ways in which cyber savvy board can help is even today, a lot of attacks that we have seen, they about 29 to 30% are still insider-led attacks, which all comes down to awareness, employee awareness, the kind of importance that they give to do's and don'ts, taking exams and certifications and training programs, etc. That area we would improve when we have a cyber savvy board. Cyber savvy board would be able to take the right actions to make sure entire organization is giving enough importance to cyber security. Even in the current frames where we are moving more and more towards hybrid workforce, current remote work culture is going to continue. Many employees have picked up a lot of bad habits in the last 2 years in terms of their day-to-day work and in terms of unsafe networks that they use, the accesses that they use, enabling accesses to third parties, malicious code, uploading code, access to cloud, lots of bad habits because they are not working within the framework of an enterprise. No, they are not always governed by corporate policies. They are not always within the framework of corporate firewalls. All of this would require a lot more attention from the board to rectify and also put back those strict measures, and that's possible only when you have a cyber savvy board in place who sort of understand. And also looking at the cyber trends, the risk trends. Ransomware attacks have increased by 120% just in last year alone. Everybody is on a fast track path to digitization. India has seen the maximum digitization in the last 2 years. Everybody is available online and all the digitally transformed companies, about 80% of them have had cyber attacks in the last 1 or 2 years. And many of them have had repeated attacks. And that would not just affect their reputation, its financial damage and everything. And that trend is going to continue. Once again, a cyber savvy board is what is definitely the need of the hour to make sure an enterprise is protected. We want endpoint security in place. We just don't want to go cloud, but go secure cloud. And cloud is an organization-wide strategy. Adoption of IoT is an org-wide strategy. Digital transformation is an org-wide strategy. All of these are tied to how we want to take businesses to our customers, take businesses to our partners. And what's important is how securely we do all of it. Once again, the business is secure only when all these paths of transformation are secure. Security is built into all these areas, which again has to be a top-down approach, and a cyber savvy board can definitely help there. And once again, even within the board level, there is confusion around cybersecurity and legal compliance. Many boards still think that I'm legally compliant, that means I'm secure, which is not the case. And only a cyber savvy person can sufficiently clarify and convey and fix that problem, which that's another reason why we need a cyber savvy board. I mean, I am ISO 27001 compliant. It doesn't mean you are risk prone. It doesn't mean you are you don't have to fear about any attacks. But many boards still carry that impression, and that needs to be corrected. So cyber savvy board once again is very, very important. And this fast-paced growth is not going to stop, which only means attacks will continue to increase at 120% and 6 trillion number that Pawan just talked about. That's only going to increase year on year. And to be ready for future and to be ready for these completely coordinated, very high-end attacks, cyber savvy board is really important to give it that much of importance and have the right skills on board, which are becoming very expensive day by day, by the way. So you also need you also need the right importance and attention and focus given to the right places also, which only again a cyber savvy board can bring into picture. You don't want to go boiling the ocean, protecting everything. That's not possible. Identifying the right crown jewels, putting the right technologies in place, and at the right time also, and keeping it and maintaining it on a regular basis. It's not that security is not a one-time fix. We do it today and we are done and we are protected for the rest of the life. That's not the case. There are acquisitions, there are mergers, there are business expansions. It's going across boundaries, across geographies. So a cybersecurity savvy board can keep cybersecurity program running and active and an enterprise protected through all these changes that an organization is going to go through.
Priya, thank you for sharing that view of kind of the holistic take that a board needs to provide to be able to manage through all of the changes and transformations and evolutions that a business goes through. Kalyan, would love to have you pick up on the topic of what do you need to do to go off and find that right type of expertise? What are the types of profiles that you've seen of people who can bring that perspective to the board? And love to hear about how you've thought about it yourself in your settings in terms of how you provide that level of awareness and training, and if there's a point person on your board who you look to for that type of expertise.
Not all boards, it's you have the luxury to have a technical savvy board member. So not everybody has that luxury. But I think wherever it is, it's possible and applicable, it's good. But I think it's very important. I think, if you look at all the comments and the discussion, that everybody is saying, it's important to have that one person. If you do not have the technically savvy person, it's very important to pull in CTO almost into every board meeting. And have them report those priorities. How are we performing? What is the transparency? What is the budget? What is the next 12 months plan? What is the next 5-year plan? What are the technologies that are changing? What tool sets do we need to implement? And what's the budget for it? Because, as Priya alluded, you can't boil the ocean, right? You can't do everything. Pick up your crown jewels, get the budget allocated for it, get those projects implemented, and report that effectiveness back to the board. Now, coming to the skills, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to find, and there isn't one skill also. Honestly speaking, it's you can't just go and hire one guy, pull out of the market and pay and get it done. I think it starts with that culture, it starts with that framework, and within that framework, right, what are those skills that you need? And I think it starts all the way from, if you go from bottoms up, that endpoint security. For example, in India, one of the biggest problems is the culture of paying attention to the endpoint security, all the way from your cell phones, your laptops. You use it anywhere, everywhere you want, and most of the laptops doesn't even have the basic level of security. I think most of these DDoS attacks and these things happen really from the endpoint security, right? And because of this pandemic, as people started working from homes, you are connecting from everywhere. And what we have seen, I think in majority of the cases, wherever we saw these ransomware attacks or DDoS attacks, these kind of things, most of these things are initiated at endpoint. So I think it's extremely important that you are not only investing into some high-end equipment in your data center, but also very important that the companies also invest into the networks and also to the endpoint security wherever your employees are working from. So these kind of things happen only when CTO rolls up all that information back into the board and get that budget approved and get those things implemented and report back to the board. The other point, last point that I want to make, Velu, is the concept of disaster recovery is still very foreign. Right? I think things do happen. We can't, of course, people need to do whatever we need to do, but then things do happen. And how are we protecting our data? How do we ensure business continuity in case a disaster happens? In case there is a ransomware, you can't fix that problem, things are stuck, there's no way to move forward. In the recent past, if you just take how many Indian enterprises got stuck, we have seen enterprises where the stock price went 10% down overnight just because of a ransomware attack. In those kind of circumstances, how do you recover in a matter of 15 minutes versus 24 hours, 3 days, right? This is where you invest into a proper disaster recovery mechanism in a different seismic zone within the country, where with a click of a button, you basically cut over into disaster recovery. So this is where, again, where the technology savvy board or the CTO of that organization takes this, gets this implemented, gets the buy-in on the board. So that way you are secure. I think disaster recovery is the way to go for any normal organization who has technology and who has things running, applications running on the cloud or even on premise.
So, Kalyan, thank you for raising that important issue with regards to, again, how to look at it and the fact that there's no kind of silver bullet, if you will, right? You might not be able to go off and have one person to do this. There's not an issue of just being able to have this. The last point that you raised about disaster recovery is also key, because it's not just about the disaster recovery part, it's also just the incident response part. And as Pavan highlighted, being able to be transparent about what has happened, what you've done about it, how you hope to, what you intend to do about it, and also understanding what the PR implications are of how you message what you've done about it also winds up being critical. So there's the issue of just kind of dealing with the situation itself. It's interesting because as I've heard you all speak from your different vantage points about this, it's clear that there are a number of technology-related enablers in this, whether it be the issue of putting these practices into place, but there's also, as Anand and Pavan have pointed out, this issue of that general manager mindset of how you take on these issues, right? These are all trade-offs that need to happen. You can go off and try to ensure, you can try to go off and provide all the resources that you want, but you still have a business to run. You still have services that you need to offer. You still have to go off and provide the flexibility that your employees and your trading partners and your customers want in terms of how they interact with your business and the things that they do. And all of these things require you to have an exposure to services, products, interfaces, capabilities that are out there. So this general manager mindset on how you make sure you're aware of it, how you make sure you're informed about it, how you put together the right, if you will, dashboard or KPIs around understanding where you are in the journey, and how you use a combination of both process and technology solutions, and that management oversight, the cadence of being able to go off and ask these questions, all becomes critical in implementing the types of situations that you all have described. What I'd like to do is, we have only about 5 minutes left in this round, and this has been a rich discussion, is are there any specific examples of approaches that you've seen used, either from the perspective of tools to help challenge the board into the cadence that needs to be followed, in terms of risk frameworks that you've seen applied that you'd like to highlight for our listeners today as ways of going and raising this awareness? Let me start with you, Priya, on that, in terms of kind of some of the suites of services and offerings that you've seen provided.
All eventually goes back to awareness. Having somebody who is more aware as part of the board definitely helps, and I mean that may or may not always be possible. Regular reporting of cyber risks to the board, and first of all making it part of their objectives. Their KRA should definitely have cybersecurity. Improving cybersecurity on a regular basis should be part of their KRA, and then they are definitely obligated to look at it, review it on a regular basis. Regular reporting of cyber risks would definitely help. Giving them enough information about the applicable mandates for the organization, for the geography, for the domain that they are political, geographical implications, they have to be on top of it. And this is also a changing landscape. So regular updates, that would definitely help. And a regular update to them in terms of global attacks and penalties and what's happening in the industry, what are the nature of attacks. Sometimes you also have to impose the fear of God into them, and that helps at all levels. That is important. And generally internal cybersecurity statistics as well. Let them know where we are, what we have done, how is the internal employee awareness. It's like I said, it's all about as much information shared and as much awareness created from all angles is what I would say.
Super. Anand, any perspectives on kind of GRC tools that can help in this arena, the governance, risk, and compliance capabilities? Is there a tools angle on this that can help to bring this story along?
Yeah, sure. I mean, before that, I would just want to sort of all of us to empathize with people on the board, because consciously boards are also being advised to go digital. They are being advised to migrate to cloud. They're being advised to have a hybrid workforce, the employee base, because consciously boards are also being advised that if you don't go digital, if you are not on cloud, and if you don't use AI, with a hybrid workforce, you may not exist in a few years down the line. So at one end, we are consciously moving towards digital, and in the process, increasing the risks with the multiple endpoints, with migrating to multiple public and private cloud, going from on-prem to cloud. So essentially, I think the framework has to continue to evolve, because which was good yesterday may not work tomorrow. What I've seen work well is having almost a grading metric where you point the traditional infosec or digital sec aspects, and you start grading yourself, while the criteria for grading keeps getting upgraded. Boards, just by virtue of seeing those grades, they can compare themselves. Like I've seen companies, if they're a part of a larger group, they compare the grades versus various companies in the group, and then they find the best practices, and then they apply across the thing. And so at one aspect, the board is seeing the grades of it being more digital, more using data, and at the other aspect, it is seeing how it is managing its risk in terms of grading. And very, very important is the fact that both the criteria keep getting evolved. So that awareness, that the acceleration has to be on both the aspects, must be
balanced out.
Yeah.
Right. Great, thank you, Anand. Kalyan, let me ask you the GRC question. Are there tools that can help us along the way? Anand did a great job of talking about the conflict that the board faces and the ever-increasing responsibilities that you have as a board member and that you have as a senior executive in making these things happen. Any comments on how this all comes together and tools that can be?
I mean, as much as the tools, I mean, you have, I mean, actually something called as a SOC process. It's a process, it's a set of tools, right, where depending on the size of your organization, you have a 24/7 SOC that is running, where you have the network and cybersecurity engineers, proactively set up the alerts, the process in such a way that these things are proactively being monitored. You're stopping them at the root without coming into your network. So these kind of processes need to be set up, but then the key is the SOC. SOC is a very broad process. It's a combination of tools as well as the process and the humans, which is nothing but the engineers who set up this entire the process. Either organizations can outsource this or implement this in-house. There are a number of organizations out there where they do a multi-tenant SOC, if you will, where you can do a subscription because you cannot afford to set up an entire SOC where it's a multi-tenant SOC where you can subscribe to that SOC and then they do the job for you. They monitor your network, they monitor your security and everything. So that way you can do it at a fraction of a cost. This is one thing. And then going to my point earlier of the disaster recovery, which is the DR, if you cannot afford this, at least have a near or a far backup, which will protect you. Have a real-time backup, basically, ideally in a different data center or in a different location, so that it's on a different network, and if something were to happen, you can quickly recover it from there and do it. So implement something like that as well.
Super. So combination of the ability of getting some sort of security operations center for the tactical implementation with whatever tooling is needed to go off and do this, and never ever forget that being able to go off and provide high availability and quick recovery is super important. So whatever you need to do to build that redundancy, if you will, into your approach to data and services and systems. That's great, Kalyan. Thank you. Pavan, let me allow you to have the last word for this wonderful panel and share your thoughts on how you've seen approaches of groups that have been perhaps educated with the types of perspectives that you and your colleagues can bring from the legal background, along with some of this rational general manager approach that I've heard so many of you speak about today in terms of balancing out the business prospects with the technology building blocks that are needed to assure these things. What do you see the right mix being? What's your thought around kind of what we should be doing from the perspective of boards, especially in India, to see this through? Your thoughts, Pavan?
Boards have to realize that they are going through transient times. And I've recently written a book called New Cyber World Order Post-COVID-19. Boards have to be realistic of the fact that by the time nations are victorious against the current and subsequent wave of COVID-19 infections, we will enter into a new cyber age where a new cyber world order is awaiting us, where states are going to get very powerful, where cybersecurity breaches will be the new default normal, and where increasing cybercrime as part of the golden age of cybercrime will be our daily default option. So in a scenario like this, the only learnings that COVID-19 times have brought before us is the need for constantly revisiting and revising our digital skill sets, because these cyber skill sets is what's ultimately going to be our saviors in the high seas, where there'll be nobody else for us to actually put our reliance or rudder on. So in a scenario like this, the boards will have to increasingly go for new capacity building initiatives. The thought process that we are the board, we know everything, is a thought process of the mindset of the yesteryears that has to be completely given away, and a new mindset has to be brought in, where beginning from the boards down, top down below, there has to be a more cyber capacity building. Why? Because till such time you don't know how these new emerging technologies are impacting you, how you know that artificial intelligence today is being used for the purposes of committing cyber crimes on cybercrime as a service model on the darknet. And these cybercrimes could potentially be targeting you as an organization. We have created an online platform called cyberlawuniversity.com, where I've crafted various courses on cyber law, cybercrime, and cybersecurity, as also AI, blockchain, and IoT. And these courses, which are meant for professionals, have already been done by more than 27,500 professionals from 174 countries, speaking 52 national languages. And I think these figures are only telling us one thing, that there is a need for massive capacity building. And the quicker the boards of today realize this and start implementing these capacity building initiatives, the better it's going to be. Apart from that, it does not mean that you please throw away the baby along with the bath water. You'll have to imbibe in your normal due diligence, your practical prudence, and your practical approaches that you're doing. But ultimately, it's a combination of various elements and strategies that may ultimately put you on the right path for you to be least exposed to consequences, both legal, practical, and reputational as we go forward. So I think it's a holistic approach that these boards of today will have to come up, because the times are new. But as Robert Frost says, the woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. I think boards have to realize that they have to walk miles before they can actually go to a state of complacency.
Thank you, Pavan. I'd like to thank Priya, Kalyan, Anand, and Pavan for your wonderful commentary today and helping to broaden the topics of how these issues of raising cybersecurity awareness for boards can be handled. For me, the biggest learnings from hearing from you all are that the concept and the problems are knowable as much from a general manager and business leader perspective as the perspectives that you all bring. There are critical roles that technologies can play in obviously implementing these solutions and in making sure that we go and build out the right business processes and technology processes and point technologies to go off and assist in these activities. That there is both educational material and specialists out there who can help paint the landscape. But in the end, this needs to be solved as a business problem, and it needs to be run and governed as a business process with the type of general management mindset and skill set needed to go off and balance between the opportunities and the risks. And I think hopefully what that will give comfort to board members out there on is that this is an achievable task, but it's one that requires us to have awareness and to fully leverage and empower the operational expertise of our management teams while still asking the hard questions that you all have hinged on today. So thank you for sharing some of those hard questions. And again, I appreciate very much your participation in the board today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into ET India Inc. Boardroom. Stay tuned for more.
And Vineet, I think we have a very exciting topic today to talk about, especially on the future of work, how the workforce is getting transformed with the help of technology, and as we look forward, a few years and maybe a decade out, how does some of that look like going forward? And that's what we would discuss today. So the way I've been thinking is, there are probably broadly 4 or 5 topics that we should touch upon, starting with, the impact of technology on the workforce and how it is transforming the workforce of the present and hence in the future. The second is around what people are looking from work itself is changing, and how does the future of work itself looks like, and that ties in very closely with how do you look at the next iteration of skilling, upskilling the workforce to make them future ready. And then of course there is always a persistent discussion on how is automation going to treat the workforce of the future? Is it everything going to be driven by AI? Where does the humans fit in the future of work? And then, if we can touch upon a little bit on, given the current global scenario, do we see an impact on Indian workforce from what we would probably calling a deceleration of globalization itself? So those are a few things that I think we can talk about on, given your vantage point, from the technology side, how do you see tech impacting the workforce today and going forward?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. So yeah, my reaction, my response to that question would be that 2020, when we were all hit with this, the first at first it was a reaction. I think all of us reacted in whatever ways we could, which meant that we did what we could with whatever we had. So whether if you went back to, most of us, wherever it possible, we went back to home and started working. I represent the healthcare industry with hospitals and across India and 6 other countries. So for us, the front line obviously had no choice. They were in the hospitals. It's only the back office that went back home and started supporting this front line. And reaction meant that we were on our teams, we were on our solutions that were available on the cloud, and for anything that needed a remote access, because for that purpose, because that solution or tool was sitting on premise, there were tools like the VPNs, and which is the virtual private network, which was accessing, you used to access. So in simple words, we had to let access to these people to use tools to access the systems sitting on premise. So that was the first phase of reaction. This phase had very interesting times. This phase saw us working extended hours. This phase saw people not looking at what time of the day they were working, because one, there was an external environment that was very, very different. We were all responding to that pandemic. In our case, we are trying to ensure that our healthcare workers and people were supported as far as possible. So from all the other parameters subsequently, which we started discussing around productivity, etc., we were very, very highly productive, and times were very, very, very different. So this went on perhaps for about 6 to 8 months, and various technologies and tools came into existence by then. And interestingly, most of these tools and solutions were always existing. There was nothing invented in 6 months, right? So most of these were existing, and everybody found a good use case when this scenario happened to us, right? So things like collaboration tools became more popular. Tools that are used for workflows became popular, because now there was nobody there to run around and chase a particular paper to be approved. It was workflow that you were depending on. Tools like Teams and Zoom and everything came into being more popular. So whether it is collaboration, whether it is working with teams, whether it is looking at work streams and various workflows as to whether the work is happening properly in time, everything was on tools. We obviously the most popular among them continue to be WhatsApps and the others, but which became extensively getting used to the extent that people like Us, we were a bit, the CIO's team and others were more concerned about data security and patient data, were a bit worried, but then we could do very less at that point of time. So that was the first phase. Then moved on, if I can talk about the second phase, to which we now then started looking at it was very obvious from the HR and the human resources front, they were people definitely called out saying they were now getting burned out. The extra hours were now becoming difficult to maintain. The work-life balance became a discussion. People started finding their own hours to work, which is very interesting. I believe we'll at some point of time discuss in this panel as to it's not necessary that when you work from home and remote work hours need not be mirroring the work hours that you otherwise do. So these sometimes then bring in a lot of discussions around culture. I remember having conversations with senior leaders within my company where somebody said, I'm not sure when my team is picking up the phone, whether he's doing that from his bedroom or his dining table or he's doing it while sleeping. And my question was, how does it matter? Right? How does it matter if he's, as long as he's responding? So some of these points came up. So again, because you asked specifically, how did technology play a role? Yes, technology continued to play a role and continues to play a role. The extent to which you depend on them, the extent to which you trust them is important. Before I let go, the last point that I want to call out is, while using technology, I think it's very important for all of us to understand technology is not going to do everything for us. It has to be combined with clear policies around how do you use the tools, how are you expected to collaborate, because things came around. You have technologies to measure somebody's productivity. It's not going to really work. It's not about the keyboards that are getting entered each time every 5 minutes and the idle time really that defines productivity. The technology can be used to measure what a person is doing, but I believe the tools the real tools should be more focused on measuring outcomes than the hours spent going forward.
Understood, Vineet. So Shrikant, if I can turn to you, and very different industry, all white collar people, 30,000 people, employees. How did the transition look for you, and what do you see going forward? Because there is as we look forward, there is a big debate right now on, is hybrid going to be the future? Is it going to be largely remote? People don't want to come back to offices versus some people want to come back. That debate is raging, and in your part of the woods, I know that debate is fairly strong. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on how do you see not only what happened, but also going forward, how do you see this play out, especially for the knowledge workers?
Thanks. And thank you, Vineet. I think I'll take off from where Vineet kind of, alluded to. The reaction was more or less the same across every industry, whether it's technology, whether it's pharma, whether it's manufacturing, aerospace, and so on and so forth, which most of you are aware of. I normally put it in the phases which Vineet talked about, in the famous 4 phases, which is norming, storming, forming, and performing. The initial phase was chaotic, a lot of confusion. What is this all about? And typically the reaction part, as Vineet talked about, was how do we cope with it? But I suppose the whole industry, at least the technology industry, has uniformly came out of it very, very strongly, as you all know by the results that you see. Thankfully, because we are in the technology services space, which is what we've been advocating to all the clients, saying that, hey, adapt yourself to the latest technologies, go cloud native, use AI, ML. Data is the new oil, as we call it. So we were advocating technology, and the adaptation of technology became much faster in the post-COVID era, and it's continuing so in terms of many industries adapting to it. So we rode the wave of the technology curve, surely. But in our own industry, as you know, we went through these 4 phases of confusion, chaos, then, of course, storming. How do we going to really cope with this in the future, and so on, which is still continuing, by the way, though there is some kind of settlement around how this thing is going to evolve in the future. And of course, the productivity, as Vineet pointed out, has been phenomenally high. But there have been compromises. There have been compromises, particularly on if technology surely could enable remote working and work from home kind of a situation that we're all in right now. It has brought in a little bit of a disruption in the corporate culture, which we'll talk about later in one of the topics, which is the Great Resignation going on. It has disrupted cultures where the loyalty factor, the organizational brand factor has become much lesser than the work content and autonomy and freedom for the individual taking predominance over this, right? So now this has brought us to the crossroads of what is the future going to look like. Clearly, everybody is settling around the fact that it is going to be a hybrid work. Okay, that is something that seems to be unanimous. Now, each company may look at hybrid work in a different way, but more or less the definition around it is kind of come to some kind of a conclusion that it's going to be part work, part work from home and part work from office, in whichever format you talk about it. In emphasis, we've coined a term called work from anywhere, but collaborate in office. Because in our industry, collaboration is key. The innovation, the teamwork, sitting together and coming out with designs and design workshops and architecture and so on is a part of the work culture that we, even pre-COVID, used to kind of advocate. So we got to have this kind of a duality where his output happens from home, but coming together in the teams at work at whatever space, whatever frequency, each company defines frequency very differently, has to continue. So in my view, in simple words, we have passed the trend of getting used to the COVID era of work culture, which is going to be what we call hybrid now in different forms, but it's going to stay. And it'll have different flavors and different ways of doing things, but that's going to continue. That's broadly what my view is. Yep.
Understood. And Shrikant, just to add to that question, and please, Jags and Vineet also add in. As we are looking to, for example, you all mentioned the organizational culture sort of becoming a little loose because people haven't interacted or haven't come together in teams as often over the last 2 years. A lot of people have joined the workforce in the 2 years, which haven't met each other frequently, and hence the organization fabric is sort of weakened a little bit. Is there also a trend that you see on people's expectation from what they what they want to get out of their jobs or careers is changing? Is the new generation looking for something else other than career growth and compensation, and maybe something broader?
So let me quote from a survey that we did recently. Not just my survey, there are a lot of surveys that many organizations are doing, including Bain, which is helping us really kind of do some of these things. And there are broadly 3 things emerging. Number one is, there's no question in my mind that psychologically, I'm using the word psychology for the ease of use, it's not necessarily psychiatric, but psychologically, there's been a little bit of dissonance post-COVID as to what is life all about? Let's put it that way, in a very large format. What are we doing? Is my career important? My job important? My family important? My life important? Is money important? These questions, particularly in the younger generation, I'm not saying the older generation is questioning it. I'm sure most of you question saying, what am I doing here? Am I here only for my career and make my money, or make it up the corporate ladder, or shall I bring in more purpose and meaning to my life? So purpose and meaning, or however you want to define it, has taken a little more predominance, more so in the younger generation, including my own son and daughter talk about saying, hey, what am I doing? Is it meaningful? So that's taking more predominance. But having said that, they're smart enough or wise enough to know that it has to be balanced with a good monetary compensation. So balance of work life, purpose, and money, these 3 priorities are, they're juggling these 3, and they become right up there, very important for factors for people to really, to come to work or do work. Let's put it that way. As opposed to before, purpose and meaning has taken a much more predominant meaning in today's world. That's the bottom line.
So if I were to just come in there, so I echo what Shrikant said. Also, my view is that, interestingly, during this period, almost every board and every leadership had a digital transformation agenda. If they didn't have it. So they had some in some form or the other, but a lot of focus was brought into digital transformation. What that did was the demand for skilled technology workers went up. And who are these guys? These are the young folks who just come out of the market, who were at a particular market price, which they said that was their value, and they saw the value go up. Okay, the value was obviously up. When the demand is high, when the value is up, people are going to react that way. So which also happened. And it became, I've got various scenarios. I'm sure Shrikant and Jax would sort of come across. Interviews became very difficult. You would have guys coming to interviews with multiple offers in hand. The conversations are very different. So you could say it borders on not being very healthy, but at the same time, that's what it is. So this young generation that comes to work are no more happy when they are being micromanaged. They want to be let go of to do their work on their own. So that brings in a lot of change in culture. If you happen to be a legacy organization with your mix of age group being a little towards what Shrikant called as old and senior, more people like me with a lot of gray hair, then you really have to balance it well. Because if you're expecting these guys to come and give you daily updates and come walk into reviews with minutes, you have lost it. It won't work. So you have to really change the way of working, and that again happened. And bring that again. There are a lot of stories around how difficult it is to get digital and technology folks into the team.
Yeah. Just to add to Shrikant and what Vineet said, what surprised us most was that could we do work from home? We all thought, coming to office was default, and, we could not do many things from home. That mindset completely changed. COVID changed that mindset. And then people also, as it, went through the months of COVID, people are also comfortable. The bosses became more comfortable with the workers. And it was always a thought of, if you are right under my nose and under my eyes, I think you're working. Otherwise, you're not. If you're at home, you're probably not working. And that was the assumption earlier on. I think that kind of changed the paradigm completely. And it became such that, people were accepted even working from home. Of course, Shrikant talked about the downsides of it, but then just surprised us. Secondly, what also it was more profitable also for companies because they contained costs. So the question was, people started thinking whether my travel earlier was at all necessary. And, people, you need, most of our executives used to kind of run to and fro as though they had season tickets on planes. But then, the question during COVID came up was said, is it at all necessary? Is it a travel which is necessary, urgent, whatever it is? But then all of a sudden travel came down to zero really. So, so those kind of questions are there really. And I know, from a HR viewpoint, you need to meet people, talk to them and so on and so forth. The physical, affinity is much more important in many situations, including sales situations, etc. But then people somehow managed really well and delivered really. I think those were the surprises which came in along with COVID. And like what Shrikant mentioned, I think going forward, it looks like much more the hybrid work culture, and people became, I think of all, more importantly, it was like people started respecting each other for the work they do. The downside, of course, is, work was 24/7, absolutely. And you were expected to reply any time in the day. And that was an expectation, which was a little, overbearing and, not required perhaps, but then became, I'm available 24-hour types. That was the kind of thing which came up really as a downside really. So I think that's what I thought I'd add really.
No, Jag, thanks for that. And maybe that sort of brings me to the next question. In the future, Shrikant and Jags and Vineet, as hybrid becomes the new norm, two questions. One is, how do you see some of these, I would say, quote unquote, overbearing expectations going forward in the future, right? There needs to be boundaries between work and life. And those boundaries need to be respected by both sides, both employees as well as leadership. How do you see that playing forward in the hybrid world? And the second question would be, if I look at it from the many different industries, and at one end maybe a complete knowledge industry like IT services, another end might be very different if I look at infrastructure or manufacturing. How do you see the leadership teams of India Inc. get used to the idea of people being remote, people doing things and being accountable for outcomes, and a lot less dependency on in person, I want to know what this person is doing, and micromanagement? Has the dust settled somewhere, or is it different answers for different industries?
Let me take a stab at that. A kind of show, I probably disagree with you. And then let me tell you, I'm no expert on hybrid work, and I personally believe there's a lot more evolution which is going to happen as we go forward, not only on technology, but on tools, on mindsets, on cultures, the way we work, Uberization of work, as what we talk about very popularly, where work will be contracted out from different locations. And I think there's a lot more coming, and none of us are, at least I don't profess to be an expert at it, but I'm able to see through there's a lot more coming. To your first question, that there has to be, you kind of said it very definitively, that there has to be a differentiation between work and personal life, or the way you put it as personal life, your family life, and so on and so forth. I personally think the lines are getting blurred. There was a famous time about 10 years, 15 years back in one MNC which I used to work. People used to question in town halls, how do we bring about work-life balance? That's a very popular, how do we, asking the question to a CEO or a CXO or HR heads and bosses here. And there were different answers. Everyone had a different answer. Nobody had a clear answer around it. But I think the best answer I found it is, hey, no company, nobody is going to define what work-life balance is. It's for you to strike that balance. It's for you to kind of take that personal and work and see where the balance lies. And I think that's getting blurred, and it's getting per force, like COVID forced us into many things, including technology acceleration and so on and so forth. There is going to be a definition around that. The differentiation is how each individual defines. In fact, you know it very well, and I think many of you agree. Many people are able to carve out workspaces in their homes. So that's my workspace, and this part of my this home. So if that kind of a definitions are being happening, I think the lines are going to be blurred, and it's going to be very thin. That's number one. Number two, to your leadership question, I didn't fully get the question, though I thought, how's leadership adapting to the new ways of doing things? I think they've done a fabulous job. I think Vineet and Jagan did talk about, that we adapted in the last 2 years, as you've noticed it right now, adapted to this very well. And as I said, it's evolving very well, how to really work with the remote workforce, how to monitor them, how to give them performance management feedback, how to measure their productivity, how to really bring them to collaborate, how to even remotely collaborate through various technologies, which are again evolving. It's not just Zoom. In Zoom, as you know, Shuo, you can do design thinking workshops and take notes on the Zoom and share the notes immediately. There's a lot of record of all the chats that's happening, which is much better recording than what we used to do. And word to text, text to word, images to text, kind of artificial intelligence technologies which are coming in right now. Web 3.0, which is promising a lot for the new age ways of working. So these are all coming in. So this thing is, I think they're adapting it pretty well. My biggest question is, will we be able to bring in a new culture? What the culture is going to look like? It's $1 million question. Even I keep pondering a lot. What is this new work culture going to look like? The hybrid work culture, not the work per se, the work culture per se.
Got it. And like Shrikant, if you want to add, or on the work culture, that was probably where I was getting to next, because we all discussed that the organizational culture, the fabric has weakened a little. And how do you stitch it back together where it was, probably, because that's very important for organizations in the new world, right? Because it's not going to be the same. You won't have people 5 days in office anymore.
So if I can come in, because just to what, just take it from where again Shrikant left. A couple of things, right? So if you ask, yes, it has not settled. I think it's evolving still, because we're still trying to find ways. But the intent is clear. The intent is clear, and as long as the intent is fine at an organizational level, you'll find ways and means and tools to keep evolving and getting it right. So that's one thing. Second is, we are at the same time learning, because and that's what is evolving. So learning as to, at one time, I remember the initial phase was that, I think Jags mentioned, saying that let's cut down on all the office spaces. We don't need so many office spaces. Can we bring down the office spaces? Then we soon realized, no, office spaces are still required, because everything cannot be always online. You need place to collaborate and meet. Then we said, can we have what we call as hot seats, and we don't need to have dedicated seats? Then we said, no, we need to have hot seats at the same time. You need to have meeting rooms, because there are times when people need to collaborate behind closed doors. So I'm sure these are all going to evolve. But one thing is for certain, like I think Shrikant mentioned, right? A lot of things that were otherwise said, no, it cannot happen online, have been completely understood. Yeah, it can actually happen online. in healthcare, there are many such scenarios where, I mean, the whole teleconsult. These tools and technology existed decades ago, but was always a fear as to whether a teleconsult is right for the patient, right for the clinician. But now teleconsult is pretty simple, pretty normal. But then yes, when the doors all open, when the lockdown was out, patients still want to come and meet the doctor. But there is a teleconsult option left for follow-ups and wherever an old age person does not want to step out of the home to view. So similarly, even in a work culture, there are a lot of these things that have now become acceptable, that's the positive part of it. So I believe yes, there will always be these small nuances where, like we joke saying online doesn't mean available because the moment you see a green tick, you are itching to say hi. Can I speak to you now? Can I call you now? That has to be slowly. Maybe you'll change our status for a while, and we'll soon get over it. But I guess to coming back to what I started off saying, as long as the intent is right, we'll find ways.
Jags, anything from your end to add there?
Well, nothing much. I think between Srikanth, Vineet have covered the whole gamut really. So all I would say is, when you said leadership, have they accepted this change? Obviously, because they themselves are in the same position really. So they have faced the same thing which every other employee has faced really, in terms of communication or travel or in terms of working from home. So, and they kind of personally experience the whole thing in terms of work as well as other than work. So therefore, I mean, it's for them kind of, they understand the whole situation much more because they are also wearing the same skin around. So that's kind of much more acceptable. So it was pretty much easy in terms of leadership, in terms of understanding. And I totally agree what Srikanth said. Of course, it all depends on each of us to define what is work, what is life, and what's the balance about it really. So I think if you are able to define it pretty well, and that becomes much more acceptable pretty much in the organization, and could blur the lines of, can I talk to you like what Vineet said, in the middle of the night. So that those things, it's more by a little bit of personal culture and understanding, and that kind of comes about with your own personality.
There's one thing I would like to add, Shu, unless you're beginning to that. I mean, I know probably we're jumping the gun here, but
no, that's fine. Please add. I was just going to come back to the same question on culture. How do you
culture? Okay, let me. This is my punt, and not necessarily, obviously, not a messianic truth, or it can be controversial. But I think
none of us
many
know
organizations.
that.
I'm sorry.
I'm saying none of us know that, so it's all a punt.
You know me pretty well, so that's the point. The one thing about culture is the employee value proposition, whatever that means to many people, has to be sharpened more, and it is going to be sharpened more, right? There was a time when I personally believe that there was a lot of companies do talk. I mean, they talk about their mission, values, principles, and so on and so forth. But invariably, often more than not, customers are probably played at a slightly higher pedestal than employees. Typically, there's always a slightly different treatment to employees as compared to the customers. My guess is you got to treat your customers, your value prop is going to be the same to your customer. It has to be exactly the same to your employees. You cannot have a double speak there. If you're offering a value to your customer, you've got to offer value to your employee. You're going to have customer delight, you're going to have employee delight. It cannot talk two different value systems to different people. It could mean many things. I'm obviously talking at a very high level. I can give a lot of examples that we tend to have a different value system for a customer and we preach something else to the employees. No, that's not going to work. So your employee value prop has to very clearly factor in that the treatment you give to the customer has to be the same that you treat to the employee, whether it's your technology, your tools, your compensation, your whatever it is, your career paths, and so on and so forth. Fundamentally, employee delight and customer delight have to have same equal amount of weightage. That's my
interesting thought. I mean, I don't know whether it needs to be equal, but obviously the employee value prop and employee delight needs to be something that each of the employers need to work on in the future a lot more. That's definitely clear given the way attrition has surged, and it's not only in tech, right, Vineet and Srikanth. I think it's everywhere. It's not only the tech workforce which is leaving.
The value perceived. If the customer perceives you as a great value, the employees has to perceive the organization as great value. As simple as that. So equal means, I don't know what equal can't quantify it into perfect measurement systems, but surely perception has to be seen as equal. Yeah.
I was just coming in there because we at Asta we have a tagline which says we will treat you well. Obviously, we will treat you well was for the patients. It was very, very clear. But this, as Shrikant rightly pointed out, it was very clearly called out that this we will treat you well stands for all our Asturians and employees. More importantly now and we have several programs which started off after the pandemic, which are around these. So whether it is to work a lot more for our nurses, because they were actually the front line had a lot of tough times. Employees, whether it was for the compensation and for the benefits if somebody passed away. So all of that has changed. There's a lot of work that's happening in this. So I agree with Shrikant when he says, yes, whatever we represent in terms of customer, we now do it for our employees as well. Yes, I mean, that doesn't mean that suddenly all the compensation will go up or the attritions will stop. That doesn't mean, but then there is again, going back to that, there'll be a lot of clear intent and work towards.
Let me clarify. When I said compensation, I meant value. We do give value to the customer and price the customer for the value. So the employee giving value, the differentiation, the high value employee, that's what I mean by compensation system, not necessarily pay more, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just had only one thing to add, really. Just what has happened post the COVID, and not post COVID, rather we're still in it, is employers are much more empathetic towards employees per se. I think there's been a massive shift in looking at employee welfare much more differently than whatever it was before, really. So that empathy factor as being more considerate in whatever it is, whether it's in salaries, whether it's in perks, whether it's in other things. I think the putting yourself in the employee's shoes and thinking about it, I think that is something which a lot of leaderships have started doing much more than ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I'll give you some statistics just to agreeing completely with Jax. Pre-COVID, we used to have an employee counseling service. Okay. The uptake for the counseling service through a third party, of course, we were not counselors. We didn't know how to do that, was 2%. Just yesterday, today, whatever, just a couple of days back, I got some data from my manager who does it. It's 70, close to 80%. Uptake in terms of employee counseling, whether it's psychological counseling, mental counseling, physical counseling, family counseling, health counseling, and so on and so forth. Huge uptake. So it was there, but the uptake from employees is really kind of not even quadruple, but 100 times more.
Yeah. So I think the single biggest fallout is in terms of depression, essentially on the mental side of things. The mental awareness, the government recently announced, even in the budget, to say there will be 24/7 helplines from the government side, so that there are telehealth consults happening from the government to say whatever is on mental health, kind of render help towards it. I think that has kind of increased quite a bit in terms of the awareness of mental health.
Right.
And Shrikant, Jags, you see that to be structural, right? It's not only an outcome of the current crisis that we're going through, but since it has changed, you would expect that 80% uptake on counseling to stay close to 80% in the future as well. It's not going to come down, go back to where it was, is what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but may have to disagree with you. It's a very psychological thing. You're a typical, particularly a millennial at the age of 20, 25, sure, you must be the same age even now, but we are not.
I am also not, unfortunately, but
at that age, we all thought we were immortals. I mean, nothing could happen to us. I never even thought of insurance. I used to do all kinds of things which were like, probably will kill you now at this age if you do that things. My point is, human tendency comes back to the same thing. When everything normalizes, when everything is tickety-boo, things are absolutely smooth, I do suspect, something which is like mortality. That's what it's all about. Wellness is about me, myself, my health, and insurance, for example. I'm sure nobody in the insurance industry here. I have some data that it's gone up, must have, whether it's quadrupled or doubled, I'm not too sure. Tendency to balance out is there. So I suspect it's not going to be 80%. Everything is normal. It may come down, but surely not 2%. So somewhere in between. That's
okay.
Okay. I do agree with Srikanth. I think it will be best left to specialized institutions who deal with this, and employers, of course, will have to direct them to these specialized institutions. Of course, to that extent, it will go a drop down in terms of attention as things normalize here, like anything else does.
Great. So let's switch gears a little and maybe look towards, like, in the future, as we talk more of automation coming in, more digital tools at people's disposal. There is always a sort of fear, and this has been predicted multiple times in the past, saying, oh yeah, this particular technology is going to eat away or change your job, and then you have to get reskilled. So as we stand in like 2022, what's your perception on the threat from pervasive AI or automation coming in and replacing some of the jobs, and if and when that happens, how do we sort of like retrain the workforce and upskill them to do something else which is more value adding than what they're doing today?
So let me answer this in a couple of parts. One, let's see what automation has happened over the last few years. In fact, I mean, it's not something which happened during COVID. It got accelerated during COVID as much. So as you know, of course, industrial revolutions keep happening every few years, but then it's been accelerated now with changes in technology, which is come to the fore really. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. If I think of when was the last time I went to a bank to do any personal work on a bank, I can't even remember. It's maybe 2-3 years that I've gone to a bank. Now, I'm going to rephrase that question one more time to say, when did I last go to an ATM? Now, once again here, the number of times I've gone to the ATM in the last year is far and few. I can say 2 or 3 times, not more than that, definitely. What's the reason? The reason has been, here is a wallet. And you don't require a wallet now. I think most of us don't use a wallet now because your cards or credit cards is redundant today. More or less, I'm telling you today, this is not there because you have your phone and that's your identity on anything for that matter. Any payment today has moved completely mobile, and that's what technology has brought about really. So the banks, you don't physically go there. You've not gone to the ATM as many times as you have done in the previous year. You've almost forgetting your wallet because you don't require it. You don't require cards of N numbers, etc. Yeah, including your driving license. Now people accept it on your mobile, so that's still okay. An image is still fine. So technology has been all pervasive. So it's been one, whatever we do normally, things which we do normally. For example, banking. For example, I mean, let me go one level down in terms of the lowest rung of society. So you go for your morning walk or morning run, and then you say, let me have a tender coconut nearby. And then that fellow has got stuck a Paytm QR code on one of his tender coconuts, and you go swipe them. Now, look at the adaptation of technology from the lowest level of people. I can give you another example. I was trekking in a remote place in off Mysore, and when I went there, there was a temple at the top. I did not take my wallet. I forgot completely. I went there and I was hoping I had to make some offering. I didn't have money there. So the pujari told me, you don't worry, I have ATM, you can transfer it. So it's incredible. And this is some remote place in Karnataka it's a village, absolutely. And you probably think there will be no signals around there, but there were, and I transferred money there. So one, technology is a given thing going forward. I think there is no two ways. Work around us has completely changed. Technology has changed every part of our life, whether you do your daily groceries or your cart vendor or you order food or medicines. I think they are at your doorsteps today, and that's a given. And going forward, it's whether it's going to be 10 minutes or 5 minutes. I think that's various proposals which keep coming in and keep improving various things. I mean, that technology is led to so much of competition that it keeps happening by every year. So the speed at which technology changes is something which is a given today. The revolutions of the industrial revolution, which used to happen earlier to say, yes, oh, is machines replacing manpower, is gone to such an extent that in a blink of an eye, things have moved really. What COVID did was just said, let me accelerate it by another 2-3 years, whatever was going to come anyway. So if you look at it from the government side, what the government did in India, very smart really. They looked at Aadhaar, for instance. It revolutionized stuff really. The UPI revolutionized stuff quite a bit because it laid the backbone for various things, for information to flow everywhere, so that people work around it. I mean, to say there are a lot of apps, as you know, created around these things, and that will continue once again. And in the medical space, like where me and Vineet are, pretty much what is happening, the National Digital Mission, which is much more focused on patient registers, getting the registry done for the patient's identity and diseases and so on and so forth. That's been fast tracked like anything. And believe me, that's going to happen absolutely, because the rate at which the concentration of the government is on that is phenomenal. And they've identified very many things to say how to kind of get things done. And as you know, Aadhaar has already given you your digital identity. People are using the digital identity already without us knowing that that's going to be the digital health card, so-called the health card, which is coming up. The big 16-digit Aadhaar number below that, there's a number which describes yourself, is going to be the medical identity card. So it's only that people are now trying to see how to kind of link it to various things, the registry, so that work around this happens. So if your question is there a threat of automation? It's already there and has fast tracked as much really, and it's real. So therefore, what we'll see going forward in the future is about automation, which will happen in intervals which are faster and faster as we go ahead, and people need to get adapted to it. So otherwise, as you know, I mean, classic issues in terms of losing jobs will happen. Now, what will happen to jobs is that people will lose jobs? Yes, pretty much yes. At every industrial revolution, people lost jobs, but then they found newer jobs. And that will once again get created, because there will be newer jobs where in some cases you may need to reskill or upskill, or in some other cases you will have to completely unlearn and relearn. And those are things which will be available to people as we go ahead. Of course, there are going to be jobless, but then it's going to be at an alarming rate, which I see if governments and people themselves don't get involved. Because to do a reskilling program of this mammoth nature, governments will have to take notice and start working towards it really. More to say how to kind of either reskill, upskill, or create the infrastructure for that. And that will happen. Whereas, once again, there is a set of things where here are these jobs which will completely disappear. You may no longer have a travel agency which is already gone to some extent. You may no longer have the clerks or the cashiers, etc., which you are already doing things online today. That's a complete thing which is just completely gone today. However, healthcare will survive that, because you need somebody personally attending to you. You need a nurse, you need a doctor, you need certain healthcare workers and so on. Whereas some parts will of course get automated, that will still be there. People involving social welfare, social jobs, obviously will remain. Security, defense in the government, that is something which will remain. But then a lot of these will get completely changed in a very, very different way, depending on technology. So to me, in sum and substance, threat of automation is there. It will increase. And unless and until governments and people take charge of their lives to say, yes, here is something we're trying to do to start reskilling the entire workforce, and that is something which will be quite chaotic. And this is what.
Got it, Jack. Vineet, Shrikant, it would be good to sort of like get your thoughts on, if you see the reskilling movement, how much of that is going to be led by industry versus led by, policy slash government would be one of my next question.
Yeah. So I'll just add on to, because I think Jack's covered a great deal. I believe, yes, there'll be a lot of, to do a little more positive thing to it, is that there'll be a lot of works which are very mundane, and which can be done with robots and process automations will happen. A lot of people, a lot of work that definitely needs human intervention and does well will continue to be there. And that's what I see. Like, so we would, like he took the example of banking, I believe in healthcare as well. You would now perhaps go to a doctor and meet him, where you definitely need to meet him and meet him in person. Otherwise, for everything else, you would rather do a teleconsult or place an order online and get the medicines delivered home and so on. So there is this phase. There's technology intervention. So, but there is one more aspect to this, which I thought it's important to call out. There are certain places where we are seeing technology intervention, which is very obvious. There is a lot of places where technology is already part of our life, which we don't even notice, because that's what we got into it. Because there are several places where technology is already part of our life, and that's become hygiene. So that hygiene part is going to go on increasing as the generation shifts. So when we say this, the automation and robotic interventions, they are talking about we're not talking about those hygiene areas. Like, for instance, the internet, the social media, the use of technology at home has all gone up. So whether it is automated switches, light switching on with a call to the Alexa, or a favorite music being played by Alexa, and the various other tools that we have. So I feel there's a big difference between how we're letting technology come into our life. In some cases, it's already into a part of your life, not even noticed it. Some places we're going to consciously bring it to your life because it's going to make your life better. These are the two different.
Yeah, I'll just add a slightly different dimension. I mean, absolutely, I agree with both of them. But I think, one key thing, at least from my sector, again, I'm speaking from my sector point of view, technology and services, where evolution of skill sets and technology is rapid, incredibly rapid. 6 months down the line, what we talk today is not going to be there. But one thing that's happening with automation and technology is adjacencies are being created. So what I say is, it's not just about skilling, it's about smart skilling. Now, what is smart skilling? It's fundamentally ability to kind of do the job architecture, the career architecture, or create adjacencies of a certain skill. Example that he took was that of a doctor or a nurse. It's not going to be outdated. But then today you have an application where there'll be a lot of doctors who are there. I can just get them on a call and get at least my high-level treatment done. Another example that I can give is I stay very close to a toll gate, where the toll gate guy who used to manually collect money and do it. Now today there is an automatic gate which has a detector, and then the car goes through it. The same guy who used to collect the money is now a kind of a semi-skilled technologist. He knows how to repair the gate, or he knows how to repair the machine on which he prints the bills and so on and disburses them and so on. So the adjacencies will always be created with technology and automation. But how to create or curate training programs and skills based on the skill adjacencies or the career architecture, and able to not just curate, but personalize the skills based on the individual needs. The perfect example is a toll gate guy cannot become a driver. I'm just giving a wild example. He can become a toll gate repairer. So how do you map those skill sets in which the career journey of that toll gate guy happens, and creating the training programs and personalize or hyper-personalize the training program is the key to smartly skilling people. And to that extent, I think, and so I know you that very well, that in IT services, we have the job and career architectures, Java skill. What does it mean? What are the various adjacencies with that skill? And then having a platform which delivers like a Netflix of learning. It maps what Shrikant Karra's persona is, and says Shrikant Karra is an HR guy. No good teaching him Java or whatever it is. So for me, these are the skill sets which are my career progression. Therefore, feeding those skill sets to the platform and personalizing so that my persona develops is a smart skilling. So fundamentally, hyper-personalization, curation, and career architectures and based smart skilling is the way to go. Not generalized skilling. Anybody can do any program kind of thing. Doesn't work anymore. I think this is where there's a bang for the buck, if you may, on reskilling and upskilling, and therefore not just losing jobs, but creating skill adjacencies, like the tollgate example or the Pujari. I'm sure Jags the Pujari guy surely learned how to use a mobile and get that tip out. He had to learn that, right? He was forced to learn.
Perfect. No, makes a lot of sense, Shrikant, and that probably will be led with a combination of, in the industry where the affected persona is losing the job, but a combination of that plus policies is what is going to in the future have to create a curated learning platform. In some industries, it's probably a little ahead, like we know in tech services, it's fairly ahead in terms of what needs to happen, but in others, it needs to get created. Great. I think we are almost at the end of the session, but I had one more question, and would be good to sort of get your thoughts as we are going through an unprecedented times. Given sort of what happened has been happening, not only in the, I would call it, world of geopolitics, with US and China sort of distancing itself. That's where it started, and then with the invasion of Ukraine. It seems like the world order is getting disrupted, and that means a little bit of deceleration in globalization, right? How does that impact, the future workforce, especially from an India standpoint? Does it have impacts, or do you think that it's a wild guess answer probably, but it would be good to get your thoughts.
You're turning corporate guys into politicians now, or political economists. That's the last thing anybody else can go ahead. I'll take a stab later, but I'll give. Yeah.
Yeah, I think let me go first. Of course, we'll have to see this, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years henceforth to look at it. It's more crystal ball gazing than anything else. So we've had two black swan events, which is COVID and still not complete. The Ukraine war, which is another black swan event nobody expected, except perhaps US guessed it. But then what's happened is also a fallout of this in terms of very many things which we've seen. Key thing which affected businesses was the supply chain, which has been highlighted across. The second and more important thing, I don't know which perhaps is not talked about more now, is about the selfishness of each country really during the vaccine distribution and during production. So for example, I have the vaccine with me, I got it produced, of course, and that was a miracle. We got it within 1 year. However, people said there's huge amounts of money spent to acquire the vaccines for themselves. So we're talking about deglobalization. While we were kind of galloping on globalization with all kinds of software tools and so on, keeping us together and closer. The big thing which shifted out was, the divided nations. The rich and poor was absolutely evident. The selfish countries and the not so selfish countries were very clearly evident in what they did. Same thing is happening during this Ukraine war very clearly. What this has made is a little bit of like what you said, deglobalization, where people have started thinking much more to say, how do I control this resource? Where do I get this pharma, API, which is only controlled by China today? So can I start my own? Now, these are things which are happening to try and protect their own, each country's people, their own resources or companies' resources and so on. Now, the context of looking at multinationals now is a big challenge really. So how do kind of multinational workforces across continents look at all those things? Because on the one hand, you have countries looking at much more selfishly towards themselves and their citizens, which could be rightfully so, but then you're not looking at perhaps one other angle from what I think is about costs. Are we cost efficient like what China is in terms of API manufacture in India? That could be a question, I don't know. But in terms of how it's affected the workforce, I think the other thing is, of course, one other thing, I missed out in terms of the government. The government is also thinking Atmanirbhar Bharat as a key example, because we want to do everything ourselves, be self-dependent and so on and so forth, really. However, from a workforce model, really, is the global multinational company, is it going to exist in this? Of course, it will. With of course, there's going to be deviations everywhere. Companies always found solutions. Maybe this is not the solution. There could be something else where solutions are there. So I think eventually business and therefore workforce will find some ways out of it. The good part is we have communication on our side, and really good faster communication, whether it's video, audio, and other accessories which are there. That's a good thing. But I also think what will happen is the workforce could be distributed, and typically a model which will come in with distributed workforce with certain aspects being dealt in certain countries and so on. So that could be something where things move on. But also, just to add only one other point, is what I also see is demand will move towards a skilled workforce. Clearly, it will move towards them, and that will not be, and it will be rather location agnostic. We don't care where, but then wherever there are skill sets, things will move towards them. The person, it will move towards that person, and that's what is, I think, will eventually determine what will happen.
Anything to add, Vineet, Shrikant?
No, nothing to add there. I mean, we present across 6 countries with GCC and India. For now, I'm just concerned about these 6 countries and just trying to live with that for now.
Absolutely.
Nothing from me too, Shubha. It was more or less the last word which Jags talked about, what I was talking about, labor economics, demand and supply, labor and supply. I mean, in technology, in my industry, you know very well, again, the technology skills and the critical mass that we have in India is huge. If you're able to really capitalize on them, work will surely come here. As simple as that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks,
it was a great hour talking to you guys.
Great seeing you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Nice meeting you, Jack.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
With that, it's a wrap on the 2022 edition of ET India in Boardroom, where we've had the opportunity to hear directly from business leaders, innovators, investors, and thought leaders who are defining the boardroom agendas that will shape the future of India Inc. and power the growth of the Indian economy in the next decade. Thanks so very much to everyone who tuned in over the last few days, and also to our panelists, speakers, and our partners. From all of us, goodbye.